Hey, and thanks for tuning in to Cheating Tales Lab. We've got another awesome story for you, and we hope you enjoy every moment. So, let's jump into the story and get things rolling. Jack Reeves fumbled with his keys, the exhaustion from his 36-hour shift making even this simple task a challenge. As the lock finally gave way, he stumbled into the quiet of his home. The silence was a stark contrast to the chaos of the emergency room he'd left behind. He leaned against the closed door, eyes shut, reliving the day's triumphs. Mrs. Johnson's heart transplant had been successful. Little Timmy would walk again after that nasty car accident. Jack allowed himself a small smile. Days like these made the long hours worth it. Opening his eyes, he surveyed the dim entryway. His gaze fell on his daughter's backpack, carelessly tossed on the floor. A fond sigh escaped his lips. "Emily," he muttered, shaking his head, "when will you learn to hang this up?" He bent to pick up the bag, wincing as his back protested the movement. As he lifted it, intending to hang it on its designated hook, a small leather-bound book slipped out and hit the floor with a soft thud. Jack froze, recognizing it instantly. Emily's diary. He stared at it, warring with himself. The scout law, ingrained in him since childhood, echoed in his mind. Trustworthy. Loyal. "I shouldn't," he whispered to the empty house. Yet even as the words left his mouth, his hand was reaching for the book. Something nagged at him, a feeling he couldn't quite place. Call it doctor's intuition, but something felt off. With trembling fingers, he flipped open the diary. His eyes scanned the pages, not really reading at first, just taking in his daughter's neat handwriting. Then, a phrase caught his attention, making his blood run cold. "And then second dad took me to the science fair. He was so proud when I won first place. I wish dad could have been there, but I know the hospital keeps him busy." Jack read the passage again and again. Each time, the words "second dad" seemed to grow larger, mocking him. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice barely audible. His mind raced, flipping through possibilities. A grandfather? An uncle? But no, Emily would have used those terms. This was something else. Something deliberate. He turned more pages, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. More references to this mysterious figure leapt out at him. "Second dad helped me with my math homework. Second dad took me for ice cream after my dentist appointment." Jack's hands were shaking now, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. How long had this been going on? How had he not noticed? The sound of a car pulling into the driveway snapped him back to reality. He snapped the diary shut, his decision made. No more secrets. No more lies. It was time for answers. Sarah's key turned in the lock, and Jack straightened, squaring his shoulders. The diary felt heavy in his hand, a damning piece of evidence. The door swung open, and Sarah walked in, her face brightening at the sight of him. "Jack, you're home early," her smile faltered as she took in his expression, her eyes flicking to the diary in his hand. The color drained from her face. "We need to talk," Jack said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. Sarah's bag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a thud. "Jack, I can explain." "Can you?" Jack cut her off, his tone eerily calm. He held up the diary. "Who is second dad? Sarah?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. She looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. "What I think," Jack continued, his calm exterior belying the turmoil within, "is that my daughter has been calling another man dad behind my back. What I think is that my wife has been lying to me. Am I wrong, Sarah?" Sarah's shoulders slumped, defeat written in every line of her body. "His name is Alan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Dr. Alan Blackwood. He was my professor in college." Jack felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The room spun around him, and he had to lean against the wall to steady himself. "How long?" he managed to ask, dreading the answer. Sarah's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of guilt and defiance. 10 years. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. A decade. A whole decade of lies and betrayal. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he possibly say in the face of such a betrayal? Sarah took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. Jack, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. Jack jerked away from her touch as if it burned. Not what I think? He spat, his calm finally cracking. What exactly am I supposed to think, Sarah? That you've been having an innocent tea party with your old professor for the last 10 years? That you just happened to forget to mention it? Sarah flinched at his words. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. Happened. Jack's laugh was bitter. Things like this don't just happen, Sarah. You made a choice. Every time you met him, every time you lied to me, every time you let our daughter call him Dad, you made a choice. The sound of the front door opening again cut through the tension. Margaret, Jack's mother, walked in, her arms full of groceries. Her smile froze as she took in the scene before her. Jack? Sarah? What's going on? Margaret asked, her eyes darting between them. Jack turned to his mother, ready to explain, when he caught the flicker of guilt that crossed her face. His eyes narrowed. You knew, he said, his voice filled with disbelief and anger. Margaret set the groceries down, her hands trembling slightly. Jack, please, let me explain. Explain what, Mom? Jack's voice rose, filling the small entryway. Explain that you've been covering for Sarah's affair? That you've been lying to me too? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. Jack's laugh was hollow, devoid of any humor. How long have you known? I found out a few years ago, Margaret admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I kept quiet to protect the family. I thought if I ignored it, it might go away. Jack shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. Protect the family? By lying to me? By letting my daughter call another man Dad? Sarah stepped forward, reaching out to Jack again. Please, Jack, let's talk about this. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this. For Emily's sake, if nothing else. Jack jerked away from her touch once more. Mistakes? A decade-long affair isn't a mistake, Sarah. It's a choice. A choice you made every single day for 10 years. He turned to Margaret. And you're supposed to be my mother. How could you keep this from me? Margaret's tears were flowing freely now. I'm so sorry, Jack. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want to see our family torn apart. Well, congratulations, Mom, Jack said bitterly. You've succeeded spectacularly. Our family isn't torn apart. It's obliterated. With that, he pushed past them both, heading for the stairs. He needed to be alone, to process this betrayal that seemed to infect every aspect of his life. Jack, wait. Sarah called after him. Where are you going? We need to talk about this. Jack paused on the stairs, not turning back. I'm going to check on our daughter. The one person in this house who hasn't been lying to me for years. His voice was cold, detached. Don't follow me. I can't even look at either of you right now. As he climbed the stairs, he could hear Sarah's muffled sobs and his mother's attempts at consolation. But he felt nothing. The shock was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. He didn't know if he'd ever be able to feel anything for them again. In the days that followed, Jack's world crumbled around him. He threw himself into his work, performing back-to-back surgeries with laser-like focus. The operating room became his sanctuary, the one place where the chaos in his personal life couldn't touch him. His colleagues noticed the change in him. The usual warmth in his eyes was replaced by a steely determination. His easy smile was now a line of concentration, but they attributed it to his legendary dedication, not knowing the turmoil that lay beneath the surface. Dr. Thompson, the head of surgery, stopped him in the hallway after his third consecutive shift. Jack, you've been here for 72 hours straight. Go home, get some rest. Jack's smile didn't reach his eyes as he replied, I'm fine, sir. There's always more work to be done. Dr. Thompson frowned, concern etching lines on his forehead. Jack, I admire your dedication, but you're no good to your patients if you're exhausted. Take a break. That's an order. Jack nodded, knowing he couldn't argue. But the thought of going home filled him with dread. Home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield. As he drove home, his mind wandered to the confrontations that awaited him. Sarah had been trying to corner him for days, attempting to explain, to justify her actions. But how could anyone justify a decade of lies? He pulled into the driveway, steeling himself for what was to come. As soon as he stepped through the door, Sarah was there, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Jack, please," she began, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk about this. I know what I did was wrong, but you have to understand. Your work, you were always at the hospital. I felt so alone." Jack's eyes were cold as he looked at her. "So you decided to sleep with your professor? To let him play daddy to our daughter? Tell me, Sarah, how exactly am I supposed to understand that?" Sarah flinched at his words. "I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. Alan was there when you weren't. He listened, he cared, and I didn't." Jack interrupted, his voice rising. "I was saving lives, Sarah. I was working to provide for our family. And all this time, you were, what? Playing happy families with your lover?" Sarah's face crumpled. "It wasn't like that, Jack. I love you. I've always loved you. Alan he was a mistake. A horrible, terrible mistake." Jack shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk, Sarah. A mistake is being late for a dinner reservation. What you did, that's not a mistake. That's a choice. A choice you made every day for 10 years. He pushed past her, heading for the stairs. He needed to see Emily, the one person in this house who hadn't betrayed him. He found Emily sitting alone in her room, her eyes red from crying. His heart broke at the sight. In all the chaos, he hadn't stopped to think how this was affecting her. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, sitting next to her on the bed. "How are you holding up?" Emily's lower lip trembled. "Is this my fault, Dad? Because I wrote about him in my diary?" Jack pulled her into a tight hug, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "No, absolutely not. None of this is your fault, Emily. You hear me? This is about choices that adults made, not you." Emily clung to him, her small body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to call him Dad," he said. "He said it would make Mom happy." Jack's jaw clenched at her words, but he kept his voice gentle. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Emily. You did nothing wrong. The adults in your life, we're the ones who messed up. But I promise you, we're going to fix this. Somehow." As Emily's sobs subsided, Jack felt a renewed sense of determination. He would get through this, for her sake if nothing else. He might not know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to protect his daughter from the fallout of this betrayal. That evening, as Jack sat in his study, trying to make sense of the chaos his life had become, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him to answer. "Hello? Jack? This is Alan Blackwood." Jack's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles turning white. The voice on the other end was smooth, almost condescending. It took every ounce of Jack's self-control not to hang up immediately. "What do you want?" he managed to grit out. "I think it's time we discuss this situation like gentlemen, don't you?" Blackwood's tone was infuriatingly calm, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. Jack's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. "Fine," he spat out. "Name the time and place." As he hung up, Jack's mind was already formulating a plan. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Blackwood might think he had the upper hand, but Jack was just getting started. He would protect his daughter, salvage what was left of his family, and make sure Blackwood paid for his part in this betrayal. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges he never thought he'd have to face. But Jack Reeves was no stranger to adversity. He'd fought to save lives in the operating room, against impossible odds. Now, he would fight for his family, for his daughter, for his very sense of self. As he looked out the window at the setting sun, Jack felt a strange calm settle over him. The storm of emotions that had been raging inside him for days quieted, replaced by a steely resolve. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. He was Dr. Jack Reeves, and he didn't back down from a fight. The ambulance sirens pierced the night, their urgent wails growing louder as they approached County General Hospital. Dr. Jack Reeves stood at the emergency room entrance, his face a mask of determination. The call had come in 15 minutes ago, A devastating multi-car pileup on the highway. Multiple critical injuries. All hands on deck. As the first ambulance screeched to a halt, Jack's mind snapped into focus. The chaos of his personal life faded into the background. Here, in this moment, he was Dr. Reeves, trauma surgeon. Nothing else mattered. What have we got? Jack barked as the EMTs rushed the first stretcher towards him. Male, mid-30s, severe head trauma and possible internal bleeding. One of the EMTs rattled off. BP's dropping fast. Jack's hands were already moving, assessing the patient as they wheeled him inside. Get him 2 or 3. Page Dr. Sanderson for neuroconsult. Move. For the next several hours, Jack was a whirlwind of activity. He moved from one critical patient to another, barking orders, performing intricate surgeries, making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. In or two, elbow deep in a patient's chest cavity, Jack felt a bead of sweat trickle down his forehead. Suction, he commanded. His voice steady despite the tension in the room. We've got a bleeder here. As he worked to repair the torn aorta, Jack's mind flashed briefly to Sarah, to the betrayal that had shattered his world. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. He couldn't save his marriage, but he could save this life. Hours blended together as Jack moved from one emergency to the next. He was vaguely aware of the nurses murmuring in awe at his stamina, his laser-like focus. Let them talk. This was what he was born to do. As the crisis began to subside, Jack stepped out of the OR, peeling off his bloody gloves. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the ache of exhaustion setting in. But there was no time to rest. More patients needed him. He was heading towards the next, or when he spotted a familiar figure in the hallway. His steps faltered as he recognized Dr. Alan Blackwood, the man who had been playing second dad to his daughter for years. Blackwood was standing with another doctor, engaged in what appeared to be a casual conversation, as if he hadn't torn apart a family, as if he had every right to be here. Their eyes met across the bustling ER. Blackwood's lips curled into a smirk, a look of smug superiority that made Jack's blood boil. Jack's hands clenched at his sides, the urge to wipe that smirk off Blackwood's face with his fist nearly overwhelming. For a moment, Jack saw red. He imagined striding across the room, grabbing Blackwood by his expensive collar and slamming him against the wall. He could almost feel the satisfying crunch of the man's nose breaking under his fist. But then a nurse's voice cut through his violent fantasy. Dr. Reeves, we need you in or 4. It's critical. Jack blinked, the red haze receding. He took a deep breath, unclenching his fists. With a last, cold look at Blackwood, he turned and strode towards or 4. He had lives to save. Blackwood could wait. As Jack scrubbed in for yet another surgery, he forced himself to focus. Push away the anger, the betrayal, the hurt. Channel it all into saving lives. That's what he did best. That's what he could control. Hours later, as the sun began to peek over the horizon, Jack finally emerged from the OR. The crisis was over. They had lost 2 patients, but saved many more. It was a victory, albeit a bittersweet one. As he headed towards the locker room, dead on his feet, a voice called out to him. Dr. Reeves? A word, please. Jack turned to see Dr. Harrison, the hospital administrator, beckoning him into his office. With a weary nod, Jack followed him in. Remarkable work tonight, Jack, Dr. Harrison began, his tone grave despite the praise. You saved a lot of lives. Just doing my job, Jack replied, too tired for false modesty. About that, Dr. Harrison continued, his expression turning grim. I'm afraid I have some bad news. The board has decided that due to budget cuts, we need to eliminate 1 senior surgeon position. Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. After everything he'd been through, after the hell of the past few days, now this? I see, he said, his voice carefully neutral. And I suppose I'm on the chopping block? Dr. Harrison spread his hands in a helpless gesture. Nothing's been decided yet, but I wanted to give you a heads up. The board will be reviewing all senior staff over the next week. I suggest you prepare to defend your position. Jack nodded, his mind already racing. He'd have to fight to keep his job, all while his personal life was in shambles. But he was Dr. Jack Reeves. He didn't back down from a fight. "Thank you for letting me know," he said, standing up. "If there's nothing else?" As he left Dr. Harrison's office, Jack's exhaustion was tinged with a new determination. He'd been backed into a corner, both personally and professionally, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Not by a long shot. The park was quiet in the early evening, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the carefully manicured lawns. Jack Reeves sat on a bench, his posture rigid, eyes scanning the path. He checked his watch for the third time in as many minutes. Blackwood was late. Typical. As if summoned by Jack's impatience, a figure appeared on the path. Dr. Alan Blackwood strolled towards the bench, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. His walk was unhurried, almost leisurely, as if he were out for an evening constitutional rather than a confrontation. Jack's jaw clenched as Blackwood approached. The man's casual demeanor, his air of smug superiority, made Jack's blood boil. But he forced himself to remain seated, to maintain his outward calm. He wouldn't give Blackwood the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. "Jack, my boy," Blackwood said as he reached the bench, his tone infuriatingly patronizing. "So good of you to meet me here. Lovely evening, isn't it?" Jack didn't respond, merely gestured for Blackwood to sit. The older man lowered himself onto the bench, arranging his expensive coat around him with fastidious care. "Now then," Blackwood began, a condescending smile playing on his lips, "I think it's time we discuss this situation like gentlemen. Don't you agree?" Jack remained silent, his eyes fixed on Blackwood's face. Let the bastard talk. Let him dig his own grave. Blackwood, seemingly unperturbed by Jack's silence, continued. "I understand you're upset. It's a natural reaction. But I think, if you look at this objectively, you'll see that there's a way for all of us to benefit from this situation." Jack's eyebrow raised slightly, the only outward sign of his incredulity. Benefit? From his wife's infidelity? From the betrayal of his family? He was curious to see how Blackwood would spin this. "You see," Blackwood went on, warming to his theme, "Sarah and Emily, they need me. I've been a part of their lives for so long now. And you, Jack, well, let's be honest. Your work keeps you away so much. They need a stable presence in their lives." Jack's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with the effort of restraining himself. "But still," he said nothing. "What I'm proposing," Blackwood said, leaning in conspiratorially, "is an arrangement. I continue to see Sarah and Emily. I can be there for them when you can't. Think of it as a support system. For your family." The audacity of the suggestion nearly took Jack's breath away. For a moment, he was speechless with rage. But then, something shifted inside him. A cold, clear anger replaced the hot fury that had been burning in his chest. When Jack finally spoke, his voice was soft, but there was steel beneath the quiet tone. "An arrangement," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "That's an interesting proposal, Alan. May I call you Alan?" Blackwood nodded, a look of relief crossing his face. He clearly thought Jack was coming around to his way of thinking. "Let me counter with an arrangement of my own," Jack continued, his voice still dangerously soft. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away. From Sarah, from Emily, from my family. You're going to disappear from our lives so completely it'll be like you never existed." Blackwood's smug smile faltered. "Now, Jack, be reasonable." "I'm not finished," Jack cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. "If you don't, I will destroy you. I will report you to the University Ethics Board. I will provide evidence of your inappropriate relationship with a student. Yes, Alan, I have evidence. And I will ensure that your academic career ends in disgrace." The color drained from Blackwood's face as Jack laid out his plan in excruciating detail. The older man's arrogance crumbled, replaced by a look of dawning horror as he realized the precariousness of his position. "You can't," Blackwood began, but Jack cut him off again. "I can, and I will, unless you do exactly as I say." Blackwood's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. He looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. But what about Sarah? What about Emily?" Blackwood finally managed to sputter. "They need me." Jack stood up, looming over the seated man. "What they need," he said, his voice cold, is for you to disappear. You've done enough damage. It's time for you to go. With that, Jack turned and walked away, leaving Blackwood sputtering threats and pleas behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew he'd won this round. As he strode out of the park, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time since discovering Sarah's betrayal, he felt in control. Blackwood had thought he held all the cards, but Jack had just shown him how wrong he was. Now, it was time to turn his attention to the next battle. His job at the hospital was on the line, and he'd be damned if he was going to lose that too. With renewed determination, Jack headed home to prepare for the fight ahead. The conference room was silent as Jack Reeves stepped up to the podium. The review board members sat in a semicircle before him, their faces impassive. Jack could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken pressure of what was at stake. He took a deep breath, centering himself. He'd spent the last week preparing for this moment, poring over hospital records, analyzing efficiency reports, crafting a plan that would not only save his job but revolutionize the ER. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Jack began, his voice steady and confident. I stand before you today not just to defend my position, but to present a vision for the future of our emergency room. As Jack launched into his presentation, he could see the board members' expressions shift from polite interest to genuine engagement. He laid out his comprehensive plan to improve ER efficiency and reduce costs, his words painting a picture of a streamlined, cutting-edge emergency department that would set new standards in patient care. By implementing these changes, Jack continued, clicking through his meticulously prepared slides, we can reduce wait times by 30%, increase patient satisfaction by 25%, and most importantly, save more lives. He saw Dr. Harrison, the hospital administrator, lean forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. The other board members were scribbling notes, nodding along with Jack's points. As Jack neared the end of his presentation, he felt a surge of confidence. He'd given them something to think about, something that went beyond simply justifying his own position. He was offering them a way to transform the entire emergency department. In conclusion, Jack said, his voice ringing with conviction, I believe that by adopting these measures, we can not only weather the current budget crisis but emerge stronger, more efficient, and better equipped to serve our community. Thank you. As Jack finished speaking, a murmur of discussion broke out among the board members. Dr. Harrison opened his mouth, presumably to begin the questioning phase of the review, when suddenly, a shrill alarm cut through the air. Code blue in the ER. A voice announced over the intercom. Code blue in the ER. Without hesitation, Jack turned to the board. I apologize, but I'm needed downstairs. Lives are at stake. Before anyone could object, Jack was out the door, racing towards the emergency room. As he ran, he could hear footsteps behind him. The board members were following. Jack burst into the ER to find chaos. A patient on a gurney was convulsing, surrounded by frantic nurses. What's the situation? Jack barked, already moving towards the patient. Male, 50s, cardiac arrest, a nurse reported. We've been doing CPR for 10 minutes. No response. Jack's mind kicked into high gear, assessing the situation in seconds. Get me the defibrillator, he ordered. Already starting chest compressions. Push one of AP. As he worked, Jack was vaguely aware of the board members watching from the doorway, but his focus was entirely on the patient. Nothing else mattered. Clear. Jack called, applying the defibrillator paddles. The patient's body jerked with the shock, but the heart monitor continued its ominous flat line. Again, Jack commanded, resuming compressions. Come on, don't give up on me now. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Jack's arms ached from the constant compressions, sweat beading on his forehead. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Clear, he called again, delivering another shock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, miraculously, a beep. Then another. The heart monitor sprang to life, showing a weak but steady rhythm. We've got a pulse, Jack announced, his voice hoarse with exertion and relief. Get him to the ICU, stat. As the nurses wheeled the patient away, Jack finally allowed himself to breathe. He turned to find the entire review board staring at him, their expressions a mix of awe and respect. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, a smile breaking across his usually stern face. "Dr. Reeves," he said, "I think we've seen all we need to see. Your position is safe. In fact, if you're amenable, we'd like to offer you the position of head of emergency surgery." Jack blinked, the words taking a moment to register through his post-adrenaline haze. Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "I'd be honored." As the news spread through the hospital, Jack found himself surrounded by congratulating colleagues. Nurses patted him on the back. Fellow doctors shook his hand. In that moment, Jack felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that he hadn't experienced in a long time. But even as he accepted the congratulations, a part of Jack's mind was already moving forward. He had secured his professional future, yes, but there was still work to be done. His personal life was still in shambles, and he had no intention of letting Blackwood or Sarah off the hook. As he headed to his office to change out of his sweat-soaked scrubs, Jack's mind was already formulating his next move. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over, and Jack Reeves was just getting started. Jack Reeves sat in his dimly lit study, surrounded by stacks of papers and file folders. The soft glow of his laptop screen illuminated his face, casting shadows that accentuated the lines of exhaustion etched there. He rubbed his eyes, bleary from hours of poring over financial records and emails. It had been 3 weeks since his confrontation with Blackwood in the park. 3 weeks of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled days. But Jack was nothing if not methodical. He would build his case brick by brick, leaving no stone unturned. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he'd come to know by heart. Daniel's Investigations, a gruff voice answered on the second ring. "It's Reeves," Jack said, his voice low. "Any updates?" "Yeah, Doc. Got some juicy stuff for you. Your wife and the professor met again yesterday. Got it all on camera this time." Jack's jaw clenched. Even after everything, even after he'd made it clear to Blackwood to stay away, they were still seeing each other. "Send me everything," he said, his tone clipped. As he hung up, Jack's eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk. It was from happier times. Him, Sarah, and Emily at the beach, all smiles and sunburned noses. He turned the framed face down with a heavy sigh. Turning back to his laptop, Jack pulled up the financial records he'd been combing through. Credit card statements, bank transfers, even receipts Sarah had carelessly left lying around. It was all there in black and white, years of misused family funds, funneled into supporting her affair with Blackwood. A hotel room here, an expensive dinner there. Gifts that Jack now realized were never for him. It made him sick to his stomach. But it wasn't just about the money. Jack had been reaching out to Blackwood's former students, carefully and discreetly. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Blackwood had a history of inappropriate relationships with students, stretching back years. He'd just been clever enough to keep it quiet. Until now. A knock at the study door startled Jack from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, hastily minimizing the windows on his screen. Emily poked her head in, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Jack's heart clenched. In his laser focus on building his case, had he been neglecting his daughter? "Of course, sweetheart. Come here." Emily shuffled in, curling up in the armchair across from Jack's desk. She looked small, vulnerable. Jack waited patiently for her to speak. Is Mom coming back?" Emily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack sighed. How could he explain this to a child? "I don't know, Emily. Your mom and we have a lot to work through." Emily nodded, picking at a loose thread on her pajama sleeve. And Dr. Blackwood? Is he going to be my dad now?" The question hit Jack like a physical blow. He was around the desk in an instant, kneeling in front of Emily and taking her small hands in his. "Listen to me, Emily. I am your dad. The only dad you need. No one, not Dr. Blackwood, not anyone, is ever going to change that. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Jack pulled her into a tight hug, his own eyes stinging. As he held his daughter, he felt his resolve harden. He would see this through, not just for himself, but for Emily. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Jack found himself staring at his phone again. He scrolled through his contacts, finger hovering over a name he hadn't called in years. Mike Hawkins, his oldest friend, a detective with the police department. Before he could talk himself out of it, Jack hit the call button. Jack? Mike's voice was surprised but warm. It's been a while, buddy. Everything okay? Jack took a deep breath. Mike, I need your help. And I need a friend. Over the next hour, Jack poured out the whole sordid story. The affair, the betrayal, the evidence he'd been gathering. Mike listened in silence, only occasionally asking for clarification. When Jack finally finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Jesus, Jack, Mike finally said. I had no idea. Why didn't you call me sooner? I don't know, Jack admitted. Pride, maybe. Shame. I needed to handle it on my own. Well, you're not alone anymore, Mike said firmly. Listen, what you're doing, building this case, it's smart. But you need to be careful. This Blackwood guy sounds like a real piece of work. And if he's as connected as you say, he could be dangerous. Jack nodded, even though Mike couldn't see him. I know. That's why I called you. I need advice, Mike. Legal advice, sure, but I also need to know I'm not crazy. That I'm doing the right thing here. You're not crazy, Jack, Mike assured him. And from where I'm sitting, you're handling this about as well as anyone could. But listen, you need to be prepared for how ugly this could get. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Jack's eyes fell on the face-down photo frame. For a moment, he saw Emily's tear-stained face in his mind. His jaw set. I'm sure, he said. I have to see this through. For Emily's sake, if nothing else. All right, Mike said. Then let's do this right. Here's what you need to do. As Mike laid out a plan of action, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. And with Mike's help, he would make sure that Blackwood and Sarah faced the consequences of their actions. The game was far from over. But Jack Reeves was finally ready to make his move. The conference room at the Hilton was uncomfortably quiet. Jack Reeves sat at the head of the long table, his face an impassive mask. To his right sat Mike Hawkins, a thick folder in front of him. Across from them, Sarah fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting between Jack and the door. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch as the door opened. Alan Blackwood strode in, his silver hair immaculately styled, a confident smile on his face. That smile faltered as he took in the scene before him. What's going on here? Blackwood demanded, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Mike. Who's this? Please, have a seat, Alan, Jack said, his voice eerily calm. All will be explained shortly. As if on cue, the door opened again. A distinguished-looking man in his 60s entered, followed by a woman about Blackwood's age and a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit. Dean Hartley, Jack said, nodding to the older man. Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Thompson. Thank you all for coming. Please, be seated. Blackwood's face had gone pale. Jack, what is the meaning of this? He sputtered. Jack leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. We're here to work things out, Alan. Isn't that what you wanted? To discuss our arrangement? Sarah's head snapped up at that, her eyes wide with panic. Alan, what is he talking about? Jack didn't give Blackwood a chance to respond. Let me explain, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. For the past decade, my wife Sarah has been carrying on an affair with Dr. Blackwood here. An affair that began when Sarah was his student. Dean Hartley's bushy eyebrows shot up. Mrs. Blackwood let out a small gasp. That's preposterous, Blackwood blustered. You have no proof. Oh, but I do. Jack cut him off smoothly. He nodded to Mike, who began laying out photos on the table. Photos of Sarah and Blackwood together, in various compromising positions. Hotel receipts, bank statements, financial records showing how my wife has been funneling our family's money to support this affair, Jack continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, and statements from several of Dr. Blackwood's former students, detailing a pattern of inappropriate relationships stretching back years. The color had drained from Blackwood's face. Sarah was openly weeping now, her head in her hands. This is a setup, Blackwood tried, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Jack asked mildly. He turned to Dean Hartley. Dean, I believe you'll find all the evidence you need here to conduct a full ethics inquiry. Mr. Thompson can advise you on the legal implications." The lawyer nodded, already leafing through the documents with a grim expression. "Alan," Mrs. Blackwood spoke up, her voice trembling. "Is this true? All of it?" Blackwood opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Margaret, I can explain." But Jack wasn't done. "Oh, there's more," he said, his eyes glinting. "Sarah, would you like to explain to everyone how you've been embezzling funds from your research grant to pay for your little rendezvous?" Sarah's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a mask of horror. "Jack, please," she begged. "Don't do this." "Do what, Sarah?" Jack asked, his calm facade finally cracking. "Tell the truth? Isn't that what you should have done years ago?" The room descended into chaos. Blackwood and Sarah began shouting accusations at each other, their masks of civility finally shattering. Mrs. Blackwood dissolved into tears. Dean Hartley and Mr. Thompson huddled together, speaking in urgent whispers as they pored over the evidence. Through it all, Jack sat silent, watching the destruction he'd wrought. He felt no joy, no satisfaction, just a bone-deep weariness and a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was finally coming to an end. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Mike leaned over to Jack. "You okay, buddy?" he asked quietly. Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving the scene before him. "I will be," he said. "Let's finish this." With that, Jack stood, silencing the room with his presence. "I think we're done here," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Dean Hartley, Mr. Thompson, I trust you have what you need. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Sarah," he paused, meeting his wife's tear-filled eyes. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings." Without another word, Jack turned and walked out of the room, Mike close behind him. As the door closed, he could hear the chaos erupting again behind him. But for the first time in months, Jack felt a sense of peace. The trap had been sprung. Now, all that was left was to deal with the aftermath. The university auditorium was packed, a low murmur of voices filling the air. At the front, a panel of stern-faced administrators sat behind a long table, and in the center, looking small and defeated, sat Dr. Alan Blackwood. Jack Reeves watched from the back of the room, his face impassive. He debated whether to attend this ethics inquiry at all, but in the end, he felt he needed to see it through. To witness the final act of this sordid drama, the head of the ethics committee, a severe-looking woman with steel-gray hair, called the room to order. "Dr. Blackwood," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed auditorium. "You stand accused of multiple ethical violations, including inappropriate relationships with students and misuse of university resources. How do you plead?" Blackwood, his once proud shoulders now slumped, barely raised his head. I cannot deny the charges," he said, his voice barely audible. A collective gasp went through the room. Jack felt a grim satisfaction. Blackwood had finally run out of lies. What followed was a thorough and damning presentation of evidence. Emails, witness statements, financial records. With each new revelation, Blackwood seemed to shrink further into himself. When it was over, the verdict was swift and unequivocal. Blackwood's tenure was revoked. His academic career lay in tatters. As security escorted him from the room, his eyes met Jack's for a brief moment. There was no anger there, no defiance, just a haunted, empty look that almost made Jack pity him. Almost. As Jack left the auditorium, his phone buzzed. A text from Mike. "It's done. Sarah's out." Jack allowed himself a small smile. Sarah's own ethics inquiry at her research institute had concluded. Like Blackwood, she'd been found guilty of ethical violations and financial misconduct. Her career as a researcher was over. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and court appearances. Jack's lawyer, armed with the mountain of evidence he'd gathered, presented an ironclad case for divorce. Sarah, her fight gone, barely contested it. The final hearing was mercifully brief. As the judge delivered her ruling, Jack felt a weight he'd been carrying for months finally lift from his shoulders. In light of the evidence presented, the judge said, her tone grave, This court grants the petition for divorce. Furthermore, given the extent of Mrs. Reeves' infidelity and financial misconduct, the court awards full custody of the minor child, Emily Reeves, to Dr. Jack Reeves. Sarah let out a choked sob from across the courtroom, but Jack didn't look at her. His thoughts were only of Emily, of the future they would build together. As he left the courthouse, Jack was surprised to find a small crowd of reporters waiting. Word of the scandal had spread, it seemed. "Dr. Reeves," one called out, "how do you feel about the verdict?" Jack paused, considering his words carefully. "I'm grateful that justice has been served," he said finally. "But more than that, I'm looking forward to moving on with my life and focusing on what really matters, my daughter." Another reporter pushed forward. "There are rumors that the hospital wants you to join their ethics committee. Any comment?" Jack blinked, taken aback. This was the first he'd heard of it. But as he thought about it, a slow smile spread across his face. "If that's true," he said, "I'd be honored. After everything that's happened, I think ensuring ethical behavior in our institutions is more important than ever." As the reporters clamored for more, Jack politely excused himself. He had somewhere more important to be. An hour later, Jack stood in the driveway of a modest suburban home, Emily's small hand clasped in his. A sold sign swung gently in the breeze. "Well, what do you think?" Jack asked, looking down at his daughter. "Is this going to be a good new home for us?" Emily looked up at him, a tentative smile on her face. "It's nice," she said, "but it's going to be different, isn't it? Without Mom?" Jack knelt down, bringing himself to Emily's eye level. "It is going to be different," he admitted. "But different doesn't have to mean bad. We're going to make this our home, you and me. And I promise you, Emily, I'm going to be here for you. Always." Emily's smile grew a little stronger. "I know, Dad," she said. Then, unexpectedly, she threw her arms around Jack's neck in a fierce hug. "You're the only dad I need," she whispered. Jack hugged her back just as tightly, feeling the sting of tears in his eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope, of healing. As they broke apart, Jack stood and ruffled Emily's hair. "Come on," he said, fishing the new house keys out of his pocket. "Let's go check out your new room." Hand in hand, father and daughter walked up the path to their new home. Behind them, the sun was setting, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. It was, Jack thought, a fitting end to this chapter of their lives. And as he opened the door to their new home, Jack Reeves felt ready, at last, to begin writing the next one.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My name is Luke Turner. I'm 40 years old and was married for 9 years when the events that changed my life unfolded. I've always been a passionate tinkerer, someone who loves to take things apart and create something new. Over time, my hobby turned into something more, as people began showing interest in the gadgets and devices I designed. This eventually led me to secure several patents for my inventions. Not long ago, I decided to sell my patents, which brought in a significant payment. However, due to the unsettled state of my life at the time, I chose to place the money into a trust fund. I knew I needed to sort things out and regain clarity before deciding what to do with it. At 22 years old, I had just completed 3 years of service in the Army, where I worked as a medical equipment repair technician. My time in the military taught me that I had a real passion for working with machinery and technology. After returning to civilian life, I landed a day job repairing bakery equipment at a large wholesale bakery, which allowed me to continue honing my skills. In the evenings, I was attending college, working toward completing my degree in electrical engineering. My social life was a mix of reconnecting with women I had known during high school and meeting new people after my discharge. I dated on and off, navigating the world of relationships while juggling work and school. Life was busy, but I felt optimistic about building a future in both my career and personal life. It was a typical Friday night, and I found myself at a local lounge nursing a beer while people watching. The crowd buzzed with energy, and as I scanned the room, my eyes landed on a familiar face. Nora Hayes, a colleague from work. She was seated in a booth designed for 4, chatting with 2 other women. The bar area was crowded, with people standing and waiting for seats to open up. Not wanting to linger awkwardly, I decided to approach Nora's booth. I greeted her with a friendly smile and asked if I could join them. Nora glanced at her companions, and after a brief exchange, they nodded in agreement. I slid into the booth and introduced myself to the group. Nora kindly took the lead, introducing her two friends, Emma Foster and Sophia Bennett. From the moment Emma spoke, I found her engaging and genuinely interesting. Her presence left a strong impression on me. Sophia, on the other hand, gave me a different vibe. It wasn't that I disliked Sophia. There was nothing outwardly unpleasant about her. She wasn't rude or unfriendly, and she certainly didn't say anything offensive. However, something about her demeanor just didn't sit well with me. There was an intangible disconnect, a sense that we simply didn't click. It wasn't personal, just a matter of chemistry, or the lack thereof. Emma shifted over, making room for me to slide into the booth beside her. Across the table, Nora and I dove into a lively exchange, catching up on the parts of our lives that didn't revolve around work. Meanwhile, I made an effort to engage Sophia in the conversation, but no matter how I tried, it felt like we were speaking entirely different languages. Emma, seated next to me, observed the dynamic with quiet attentiveness. As my attempts to draw Sophia out fell flat, Emma suddenly stood up, announcing that she needed to use the restroom. Without hesitation, I shifted to let her out, and in typical fashion when more than one woman heads to the restroom, a full-blown committee meeting ensued. Before I knew it, I was left alone in the booth, their handbags casually entrusted to my care. After what felt like an eternity, the women returned from their conference. Nora came back first, gathering both her bag and Sophia's. She gave us a quick update, leaning in slightly. "Sophia's not feeling well," she explained, her voice apologetic. "I'm going to take her home." With that, she ushered Sophia out, leaving Emma and me to process the sudden change in plans. That left me with Emma and a very awkward few moments. I asked Emma if she wanted to leave or for me to leave. She said no. She then thanked me for trying to talk to Sophia. It seems that Sophia caught her fiancé sleeping with an old girlfriend and was at least temporarily mad at all men. We ended talking the rest of the evening as if there was no one else in the place. After a couple of hours of beer and pizza, I talked Emma out of her phone number and promised to call her. As we were leaving, I offered her a ride and was turned down. She had her own car there. She had not ridden with Nora. I called Emma the next day, and we set up a date for the next weekend. We went to a play at one of the local theater group venues. Emma had never seen a live play before and was an instant fan. After the play, we went for a late dinner. Dinner was great, and it led to more dates. After a couple of weeks, we dated exclusively until I got my degree. I found a job with a local electrical contracting company as an assistant engineer. I then asked her to marry me. She said yes. 18 months later, we were married. Sophia was the maid of honor and Nora was the bridesmaid. It was a wonderful wedding, and the reception was a lot of fun. As I said before, I had been a tinkerer since my high school days, and I had several bakery and commercial restaurant equipment patents that the industry liked. I created a company to handle all of that while I was working as a construction electrical engineer. I had set it up so that all that money was placed in a company account, so I had something that was just mine. Through the company, I managed to secretly purchase the house we were renting. Things were going great for about 2 years. I was promoted to lead engineer on a major construction project. Emma had found a new job at an office in the local neighborhood. She thought that as we were now financially stable, it was time to start a family. We tried everything we could to get her pregnant. Nothing worked. After 3 years, we finally went to a specialist and found out that probably because of an injury I had in the service, my sperm count was extremely low, and what sperm I was producing was not motile. Emma went into a funk, and our sex life was turned off like a light switch had been flipped. I put up with it for 6 months or so, and finally had enough. I sat down with Emma and said to her, "Emma, I am moving out. You obviously do not want any intimacy with me anymore. It is not my fault that I am infertile. If kids are more important to you than our life together, then maybe we should divorce." Emma started sobbing. "I don't want a divorce. I don't want you to leave. I am just so disappointed that we won't have kids that I forgot the fact that you are my life mate. Please don't go. I will try to be better." "That won't work. Your trying to be better is as much a problem as we have now. I don't want you to try. I want you to want to be better. I won't be far, and if you need me to do something for you, you can call me. I would suggest that we seek marriage counseling. If you don't want that, then you need to get counseling for yourself." I continued, "Emma, you are the sunlight and stars for me. I wanted to have a family with you. When I found out that I can't father children, I was hurt. But seeing you hurt is more than I can put up with. We will adopt children if that would make you happy. We can check fertility clinics about enhancements that might help. I just cannot go on sleeping next to a refrigerator as you have been for a while. When I try to hug you, you either back away like I am going to harm you, or you are just like hugging a post. When was the last time you just kissed, hell, even spontaneously even smiled at me? I love you with my very being. I am not leaving just because we haven't made love, and I can't be near you when the pain you are in is causing me so much pain. I finally wound down for my spiel. Emma was silent for a minute or two, then asked, "Where will you go? What will you do? When will you come back? If you're gone, how will you know I've gotten better? Please don't leave. To answer your questions, I will be right here in the city. I will keep working. I will not abandon you. I love you. I have to leave. Seeing you hurt like this is causing me so much pain that I am afraid that it will turn into anger. My mother has told me I could stay in the apartment over her garage. Your mother and dad have offered me an apartment in their building. I won't be far. Please, please get some help. I can't take this hurt you are causing me. I will be back when I can see that you love me enough to not shudder when I touch you." She just dropped her head, sobbed, and then snapped and screamed at me. "Find you a hole. Leave when things get tough. Just go. I will see a lawyer before I go to a goddamn shrink. Just go." This tirade was from the mouth of a lady that would not say piss if she was drinking it. I was shocked. I got up and walked to the bedroom and started packing my stuff. As I was packing, there were more than a few tears. I loaded up my car and my small trailer that we used when we went camping. It was not even a quarter full, but I was hoping that I would not be away long. I drove the 20 minutes that it takes to get to my mother's house and started unpacking. About 2 hours later, Mom came up and told me Emma was on the phone. I told her, please take a message or have her call my cell phone. After that final tirade, I don't think I want more right now. I continued, "Mom, I'm sorry you were put in the middle of this. I love that woman to pieces, and yet I can almost catch a cold from trying to just get a kiss. I know you probably don't want to know, but we have not made love or just plain sex since we found out I am sterile. I know Emma wants a family. I offered to get a divorce if it would make her happy. I am at a loss as to what to do. I am hoping that my moving out will be enough of a shock to force her to see her own hurt. If it doesn't, I may be here for a long time." I told Mom good night and went to bed. At work the next day, 2 detectives showed up at the construction site and they asked to talk to me. They said that they were following up on the burglary at my house last night. I was stunned. They explained that apparently, someone tried to force a basement window last night about 3 a.m. My wife called the police, and when the sirens got close, whoever it was chased off. They asked me why someone would want to burglarize my house. I explained to them that I had several gadgets that I have invented and some that I am working on. I told them that I had moved out temporarily and that I would go home tonight and check things out. The detective then dropped the bomb. "Sir, we have had to take your wife into the hospital. It looks like she had a psychotic episode. She is in no danger, but the patrolman who responded to the call said she was hysterical. She is now at the psych ward at City Hospital. The man who she was with was told by her to leave the house. I will get right over there to see her. Don't worry about my stuff. That is not worth one hair on her head." I went on, "Thank you and thank all the officers involved. I will do what I can to fix the problems." The fact a man was with her did not register until later the next day. When I got to the hospital, I was told that I was on the excluded visitors list. I would not be able to see Emma. I asked who made up the exclusion list. I was told Emma made some and the doctors made some. They told me that my wife put me on the excluded list. I was pissed. I decided then that that was the last straw. I went back to the apartment. I sulked for about an hour and then decided to be proactive. First, I called the hospital and asked to talk to the doctor. He called me back almost immediately and told me I was also excluded from getting any medical information. More pissed, I called Emma's parents and told them what was going on. They said they were not in agreement with Emma's stance. They promised to keep me informed. I explained what had happened over the last few days. I also told them that Emma's actions have caused me to think I was right to move out. I let them get back to whatever they were doing and then called my mother. She had worked as a paralegal until she retired. I asked her for her best choice for a divorce shark. I explained that Emma was shutting me totally out of her life, so maybe my actions will force her to seek help. I said that maybe if we divorce, she can have the children she is fixated on. She reluctantly gave me the name of Ryan Blackwood. I thanked her and let her get back to what she was doing. I then called the police and asked for a copy of the police report for my insurance. I was told it would be available in a half hour, but needed to be picked up in person. No electronic transfer was legally allowed. I picked up the report, and several things seemed to be wrong. The window that was broke was only 6 inches high by 24 inches wide. No one would be able to get through that space. Then, there were only very small footprints, noted as possibly female or child, in the dirt around the window. Then the final thing was that Emma was not the only person in the house. The other person was a man, at 3 a.m., by the name of Samuel Carter. They were both dressed only in robes. The name sounded familiar, but I could not remember where I had heard it. The report stated that neither occupant had seen who had tried to break in, and that the female occupant was extremely agitated about the fact that both names would be in the police report. Finally, the man in the house comment registered. I then called Emma's work, and the phone was answered by a man named Samuel. I quickly said, "Sorry, wrong number." Now I remembered where I had heard the name. Samuel Carter was a sales associate at the office where Emma worked. I had met him once when she first started working there. I also remembered that his wife was the company owner. What was he doing in my house at 3 a.m.? The next day, I called Ryan Blackwood and was surprised to hear that Ryan was a she. I made an appointment for later that day. I then called work and told them my assistant could handle anything, but I was taking the rest of the week as personal time. My boss called almost immediately and insisted that I report to work ASAP. I faxed my resignation less than 15 minutes later. He called back and apologized and granted the time off. Then I thought about it and sent a second resignation. No more calls from work. When I got to Ryan's office, I asked for a divorce filing and a suit against the office that Emma and Samuel worked at. I also asked for a possible eviction notice, as the house was owned by my company and Emma had no stake in that company. We were renting it from the company that I had set up to market my patents and gadgets. I explained that I had a police report that showed that Emma had a man at the house at 3 a.m. I also explained that I had temporarily left because of some problems with us. The man was there the same night that I left. Ryan told me that as Emma was under a 14-day mandatory hospitalization and that my insurance was paying for her hospitalization, she would void the medical information blackout or I would not authorize payment. She thought that I should immediately move back into the house. I should also cancel all joint credit cards. I should also call the bank and set up withdrawal limits on all joint accounts and to cancel any joint ATM cards. After doing all of the bank things, I went back to the house and found Samuel trying to enter the house. When I pulled into the driveway and blocked his car, he started toward me. I grabbed my cell and called the police non-emergency and asked to talk to an officer. Samuel came up to the car and motioned me to roll the window down. When I shook my head no, grabbed my wallet and showed him my ID, he took off running down the road. I just laughed and asked the officer if they any information on the damage done to my house from the break-in. They said the only damage was the window caused by a drunken neighbor who wandered into the driveway, and when her key would not fit the door, she kicked the window, and when it broke, she ran off. She called the station the next day and told the desk she would pay the damages. I went into the house and into what was our bedroom and found that the dresser drawers that I had emptied had men's clothes in them. I went through all of the closets and the dresser and grabbed all the men's clothes that did not belong and took those out to the garage where we had a totally illegal incinerator. I left the garage door open hoping Samuel would come back. He did as I was putting the last load in the incinerator. I smiled as he was walking up to the door. I called out to him and asked what I could do for him. He saw what I was doing and just shook his head and came in and said, "I probably deserved what you were doing. I thought Emma was divorced. She has been saying that you left her for another woman 6 months ago. So you felt you could move in? I rent this house and Emma has not paid a dime toward the rent. Emma has no claim on it. I moved out 3 days ago because of a freeze from my wife. I told her it was only temporary." I continued, "You and your wife's company will be hearing from my attorney soon." He paled and I laughed, then asked, "Would you like me to move my car so you can leave?" "Oh," I continued. "When you go see Emma, you can tell her that when she gets out, she needs to go to her parents' house because I will be taking all of her stuff there. Also, tell her I now understand the freeze. One last thing," I screamed. "How long have you been screwing my wife?" He did not answer, just got in his car and I let him out. Then I went back to the house and called a locksmith. I finished the afternoon by making copies of the police report. I made one copy for my insurance company if needed. I also made one copy for Emma's parents if they started to blame me for the problems. Then I put one copy in our safe in the basement. I was planning on putting the original in my personal safe deposit box in the bank. That box also contained all of the patent papers and a bank book where I put the money my patent licensing agreements made me. The job money and about 10% of the patent money were in our joint accounts, and that is all of the money Emma knows about. It is not much, but it is enough that if I have to split it, Emma will come out all right. The hidden money was because I wanted something that was mine only. The house Emma found out about, so she would not be able to go for it in a divorce. It would not be a deal breaker. I spent the next morning moving all of Emma's clothes, makeup, toiletries, and any pictures that did not have me in, into boxes that we had broken down and stored when Emma first moved in. The locksmith showed up in the early afternoon and changed the locks. I took all of the boxes to Emma's parents' apartment building and gave them a copy of the police report. They were not happy, but they took the stuff. I left. Ryan got back to me and said the non-payment threat was enough to get all of the medical information. It turns out Emma was about 6 weeks pregnant and had panicked when she realized the police were going to be finding out about Mr. Carter being at the house at that time. She actually screamed at the officers that arrived to investigate the break-in. Then she started screaming and crying. The officers restrained her and had her committed for a 14-day psychiatric evaluation. She lost the baby, and that really put her over the edge. The doctors wanted to commit her for 90 days as she was almost suicidal. They also noted that her hormones were elevated as if she was taking fertility drugs, but they could not find a prescription from any of the doctors that she identified as her being in their care. The note of the pregnancy was the final straw. I told Ryan that I wanted Emma served after she is released for the hospital. I explained to Ryan that I am virtually sterile and that the sperm that I do have are damaged. I also told her to immediately file suit against the company because they have a clear non-frat policy. I told her to make it painful, but not fatal. Part of the settlement was to be that they both be terminated with prejudice and receive no recommendation or severance package. The suit against the company was filed immediately, and Mrs. Carter informed Ryan through her lawyer that they would fight it. Ryan told the other attorney that we had proof of unprofessional conduct by both of them. She did not bring up the pregnancy, but did mention the police report of Samuel being in the house at 3 a.m. Their attorney told Ryan he would get back to them as his client never mentioned that fact. Ryan said she may not have known. At the mention of her, the lawyer told Ryan he would recommend a settlement. When the lawyers got back together, the settlement was reached. I got a decent amount of money and Samuel and Emma were both fired. Samuel's wife filed for divorce based on the police report. Samuel had told her he was visiting a customer site and had been there that night to get an early start. I got all of that from one of the office people that Emma worked with. Emma walked out of the hospital before the commitment papers were filed. She was served on the sidewalk outside the hospital. She disappeared, and I didn't hear from her for over a year. She did sign and return the divorce papers, but she asked for nothing from the marriage, not even the split that she was entitled to. Almost 15 months after the divorce was final, I received an apology letter from Emma. It was postmarked from a small town in Montana. She did not give any details of her life after the divorce. The letter was just an apology for the pain she caused me. Samuel had a run-in with a baseball bat the day after I got the apology from Emma. It seems that he had seduced the wife of a made man while he was in New York. I almost felt his pain. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
David Carter, 35. A dedicated software engineer working abroad, David has always prided himself on his loyalty and commitment to his marriage. He sacrificed personal comfort to provide financial stability for his wife and future family. Quiet and analytical, David doesn't act impulsively, but can be ruthless when betrayed. Elena Carter, 32. Outgoing, ambitious, and undeniably charming, Elena thrives on attention. Recently, she launched an online jewelry store that has gained significant traction. While she appears loving, her self-centered tendencies and desire for admiration reveal her true priorities. Liam Taylor, 28. A yoga instructor with a chiseled physique and a smooth-talking nature, Liam has a history of seducing his clients. His charisma hides his manipulative tendencies and lack of respect for boundaries. Maggie Peterson, 30. David's childhood best friend and now a skilled divorce attorney. Maggie is fiercely loyal to David and becomes his confidant and guide as he navigates the fallout from Elena's betrayal. Visual. David stepping off a plane, holding a small gift box in his hand, his face lighting up with anticipation. David couldn't contain his excitement as he landed at the airport. For months, he had been working overtime on a major international project. The effort had paid off. He had been promoted to a lead engineer position that allowed him to work remotely. Finally, he could come home to Elena, the woman he adored. He stopped by a local florist on the way home and picked up a bouquet of Elena's favorite lilies. In his pocket, he carried a small jewelry box containing a diamond bracelet, a token of love and congratulations for her recent business success. Visual. David approaching the house at dusk. the golden glow of lights visible through the windows. The house looked warm and inviting as he approached. David quietly unlocked the door, eager to surprise Elena. The aroma of lavender, her favorite scented candles, filled the air. He imagined her joy at seeing him and the life they could now build together with him working from home. Visual. David's face shifting from excitement to confusion as he hears laughter upstairs. As David entered, he noticed a pair of unfamiliar men's shoes near the door. A slight pang of unease hit him, but he brushed it off, assuming a friend or client had stopped by. Then, faint laughter echoed down the stairs. Not just any laughter, but Elena's carefree giggle. It was accompanied by a man's voice. David's heart began to race, and curiosity drove him forward. Step by step, he ascended the stairs, the voices growing louder. Through the cracked bedroom door, David saw Elena lying on their bed with Liam. The intimacy they shared was undeniable. David froze, his breath caught in his throat. His mind raced. How long had this been going on? Had his absence pushed her away? But no, excuses didn't matter now. The betrayal was real. Instead of bursting in, David backed away quietly, his emotions a mix of anger, heartbreak, and cold determination. He knew one thing. This would not end with an argument. Visual. David sitting at the dining table, calm but with a piercing intensity in his eyes. Later that evening, Elena came downstairs, her demeanor casual, as if nothing had happened. She smiled at David and kissed his cheek. "You're home early? What a surprise!" David didn't flinch. He smiled back, masking his true feelings. Over dinner, he asked her about her business, their mutual friends, and her yoga sessions. She answered each question casually, never suspecting that he knew. Finally, David leaned back in his chair and said, "You seem so happy, Elena. I just have one question. How long has it been going on with Liam?" Elena's face paled, her fork clattering onto her plate. "What are you talking about?" "Don't insult me with lies," David said, his tone eerily calm. "I saw you. Today. With him." She burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. "David, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. I love you. It didn't mean anything." David stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Mistakes happen once, Elena. This was a choice, and choices have consequences." Visual. David sitting at his computer late at night, a montage of him gathering evidence. David didn't act impulsively. Over the next few days, he pretended to forgive Elena while secretly plotting his revenge. She tried to rekindle their relationship, but her attempts felt hollow to him. Using the access credentials he had for Elena's jewelry store, David started collecting information. He found invoices for lavish gifts she had sent Liam and emails filled with flirtatious banter. Visual. Elena's phone buzzing with notifications as her expression turns from confusion to horror. One morning, Elena woke to find her online store flooded with fake bad reviews, accusing her of selling counterfeit. With fake bad reviews, accusing her of selling counterfeit jewelry. Her inventory was gone, the website wiped clean. Panicked, she tried logging in but found herself locked out. She ran downstairs to David, holding her phone. "David, something terrible has happened to my store. Someone's hacked it." David looked up from his coffee, his expression calm. "That's awful. Any idea who might want to hurt you?" When her frantic accusations turned toward him, he didn't deny it. "Yes, I did it. You see, I built that site for you, just like I built our life together. You destroyed one, so I destroyed the other." Visual. A bustling yoga studio where whispers ripple through a crowd. David wasn't finished. Using the evidence he had collected, he sent anonymous messages to Liam's other clients, revealing his affairs with married women. The yoga studio, once bustling, emptied overnight. Liam became the subject of ridicule and judgment. his reputation in tatters. Elena, now ostracized, found herself the target of gossip and disdain. Visual. David walking into a new apartment, smiling for the first time in weeks. With the divorce finalized, David moved to a new city. His first call was to Maggie. "It's over," he said. "Now I can finally move forward." Maggie replied, "You deserve happiness, David. Never let someone take that from you again." David focused on his career and self-growth. He joined new social groups, rediscovered hobbies, and started building a life free from the shadow of betrayal. Visual. David writing a letter, the golden glow of sunset filtering through the window. David wrote one last letter to Elena. "Trust is earned through actions, not words. When you broke that trust, you didn't just lose me. You lost the life we built together. I hope one day you understand the value of what you had. Goodbye." David sealed the letter and left it behind as he walked out, the horizon before him a symbol of his newfound freedom. Thanks for watching. What do you think of David's revenge? Did he go too far, or was it justified? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this one. See you next time. Ending quote. Healing begins when we choose ourselves over those who broke us.
I witnessed everything unfold in slow motion. It's strange how the mind operates. I was being propelled backwards, falling. I caught a glimpse of a blurry figure, then the roof, then my feet and the roof simultaneously. I hit the ground, landing on my upper back. First, excruciating pain, a crunch in the darkness. What a dreadful nightmare. I groggily regained consciousness. My head pounded. My entire torso ached. I had no idea where I was. I lay there for a few seconds before trying to open my eyes. I squinted, seeing only a fluorescent light fixture and ceiling tiles. I closed my eyes again. My body was consumed with pain, each breath agony. I felt like crying out, but remained still, trying to understand what was happening. The first attempt to turn my head made it clear that any movement was unwise. A jolt of pain shot down my spine. I tried to look sideways without moving. Even that minimal movement hurt. Then I heard voices. Was that what woke me? "Is he going to survive?" a doctor asked. "Yes," replied another voice. "When do you think he will regain consciousness?" asked the first voice with a tone of concern. "He showed signs of waking earlier, but then lost consciousness again. We just need to be patient," said another voice, whom I assumed was the doctor. "Considering what happened, he's fortunate. The MRI revealed no cranial bleeding, but there's already some swelling. He definitely has a concussion. We'll need to monitor the potential for further brain swelling. His left arm is broken in one place, both the radius and ulna, and in another place, the humerus. Judging by the condition of his back, he hit the stairs at shoulder blade level and then slid the rest of the way down. His back is badly bruised. His suit coat protected him from being scraped raw, but it's probably good that he was leaning to his left. Otherwise, the weapon he was carrying might have worsened the injuries. He might have fractured his sacrum or his hip. He ended up resting after hitting the back of his head, which has scrapes and significant bleeding. No stitches were needed. We cleaned and bandaged the wound. I understand he stopped with his feet still on the stairs. He essentially surfed down until his head and shoulders hit the bottom. Voice 1 confirmed this. How he managed not to tumble, I have no idea. I guess he went most of the way down in midair. It was about 8 or 10 steps, said Voice 1. I didn't count, but I'll need it for my report. So, we have no idea when we might be able to talk with him, said the doctor. There was a pause. We're having the woman checked out. She was resisting, but I saw blood on her fingers and wanted to collect evidence before it got washed away. Also, the sufferer had 3 long gouges on his right forearm. Can you tell me if they were made from hand to elbow? Or vice versa? Asked another voice. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down. The monitor was beeping fast, but not accelerating. I heard the curtain pull back, and someone fiddling with the tape on my arm, poking from hand to elbow. For sure, the doctor said, which doesn't make sense considering the direction of his fall. Makes sense from another perspective, said a voice. His right coat sleeve was pushed up to his elbow. I'll confirm with forensics. Can I get a cup of coffee while I make a few calls? Sue, can you get the officer some coffee? Better make it 2. His partner is here too, said a voice. The curtain closed again. So, what do you have? Asked a new voice from behind the curtain. The first voice explained what the doctor said. We have both a man and woman downtown, said the second cop. Their stories match but don't align with witnesses. Lucky we were nearby when the call came. Responding officers barely arrived before us, glad they could check the sufferer while we examined the scene. Yeah, voice 1 replied. Did you see the video? Video? The second cop asked. A girl across the landing was showing her parents her new apartment when the shouting started. They recorded a naked man and woman on the landing. The man yelled, "That'll show you your place, you stupid loser." They didn't see what they were looking at down the stairs, but it was clear they had just been having sex, explained voice 1. Good thing witnesses saw who was there, said the second voice. One called emergency. A young neighbor was next to the sufferer when the first unit arrived, pointing at the guy saying, "He pushed him. Don't let him get away." The guy was dressed and running downstairs while the woman stood at the top in a robe, bawling. They both lied, saying they were innocently visiting when the sufferer attacked and fell over his own feet, said the second voice. Both men laughed. I thought about what I heard. My brain was functioning. Maybe I could turn this around. Would it be wrong to lie? He pushed me down the stairs. I could have died. Let me go back 3 weeks. Judy, my wife, was in the shower and left her phone on the makeup table. It pinged. I looked at it. Hey, sweet cheeks, I want some hot lovemaking. How about tomorrow afternoon? It was from her boss, Mark Danvers. This wasn't the first inappropriate text. A month earlier, I saw a text from him saying, "You looked fine this morning. I want some love soon." Judy covered it up, claiming it was meant for his wife, Julie, whose contact is next to hers. Mark called, apologizing, saying he was trying to spice things up with his wife. Judy laughed it off, and we did too, making love that night. I forgot about it until now. If Mark messed up again, why text his wife about tomorrow? I realized my wife was cheating on me. I thought our relationship was solid, but it wasn't. Judy and I met a few months before graduating college, both business majors. We'd seen each other in classes, but never interacted socially. I was the typical nerd. She was the hot chick. We clicked once we got to know each other. I wasn't socially awkward, just not the athletic type usually seen with hot girls. I was 5'8" and 145 pounds. My sister and her friends thought I was good-looking, but not a stud. I joked about it once, and we all laughed. One day, I overheard Judy tell my sister, "Your brother isn't teased, he teases back. And let me tell you, he's got nothing to be embarrassed about." Becky and her friends were embarrassed. Judy wasn't seeking a rich guy. We got by, but we weren't wealthy. Judy's sales covered her business expenses, and I supported us with my sales rep job. After graduation, I continued my education to get a CPA and MBA, aiming to set up my own office. This meant working hard, often traveling to service distant accounts. Once I suspected Judy might be cheating, I paid closer attention. Mark and his wife were in their 40s with 3 kids. Judy and I hadn't started a family yet, though I wanted to. We had been discussing her going off the pill to get pregnant, but now I was glad we hadn't. I realized I'd never have a child with Judy. I had looked forward to lovemaking that night, but now I felt different. Judy was getting ready in the shower, knowing I'd start with mouth. When she came out, looking and smelling good, I wasn't interested. I lied about feeling unwell and went to the bathroom. She went to bed and I stayed up, researching how to spy on her phone. It was easier than I thought. I installed a spy app on her phone and downloaded her texts. Monitoring her phone, I found that Mark, her boss, was a prolific flirt. They managed to sneak away together a couple of times a week with flirtatious texts and calls. I saved copies of a particularly graphic phone conversation. I didn't need it to divorce Judy, which I intended to do soon, but I wanted undeniable proof she was cheating. "Let's have Zex at your apartment this Thursday when your husband is out of town?" Mark asked. "I love bending you over the couch and pounding you from behind." "Quit calling Robert a loser. It's disrespectful," Judy said with a hint of irritation. Mark laughed and started to say something. "Robert is just as large as you, if not larger. You were just too rough. I love that pounding, which is why I keep coming back. Robert prefers making love, but sometimes I want it rough, Judy continued. Yeah, you scream when I pound away, Mark chortled. Julie used to love it too, but she says I get too wild. She likes being on top to control the action. Your guy can't man up like I can. Your jackhammer act is what I want a couple of times a week. Making love is great, and Robert can get rough occasionally, but he stops when I hurt. You don't. My guts are sore, but I love it. I'm in love with Robert, but sometimes I want wild sessions, and if you call him a loser again, you won't get any this week. Wear a rubber or no Zex. Robert and I are planning to have a baby, Judy said firmly. I hate protection, Mark groaned. Well, it's that or no Zex, Judy said. And if it breaks, I'm using seed douches. Afraid my swimmers are better than Robert's, Mark laughed. Nice save, Judy laughed. But I can't take the risk. Mark laughed. All babies look alike at first? He'd be stuck raising my kid if his name is on the birth certificate. That'd be funny. No, they don't. Babies are cute, and he'd have a year to contest it, Judy said seriously. And I'd come after you for child support. You want that risk? Screw that. Maybe I should get snipped, Mark said. Julie doesn't want more kids, and I don't want to give up the hot Zex with you. Snipped or not, you can have the 403, Judy said, ending the conversation. That conversation might not be admissible in court, because one party has to know they're being recorded, but I didn't care. I needed proof Judy was cheating. She tried to make me the bad guy, claiming the affair was my imagination or just a one-time thing. These 3 weeks of gathering evidence really dampened my love for her. Once I knew for sure, I started the process to get rid of her. First, I paid off all our debts. My student loans were significant, but I paid them off first. We were careful with credit card debt, our cars were paid off, and we had some savings for a house. I also started stashing cash. I knew I'd have to pay alimony since Judy didn't make much from real estate. I paid my lawyer up front to decrease our cash. I trimmed our cash reserves and had my paycheck diverted, but I knew I'd still have to give Judy her half. I just didn't want her taking more. I hired an attorney and got the papers ready. Once she was served, the crap would hit the fan. Back to that day. I was supposed to be out of town, but had a coworker cover for me so I could handle personal issues. I considered various scenarios. At first, I thought I'd act surprised to find them in bed, maybe run Mark off at weapon point or hit him with a tire iron, but that would mean jail time. All my friends knew I had a concealed carry permit and often carried a pistol when I traveled. I knew I couldn't fight Mark. I'm 5'8" and 150 pounds. Mark is at least 6, 2 inches, and 230 pounds, always bragging about his college football weight. That fight like a man stuff is nonsense. David used a slingshot against Goliath, and I wish I were as smart as David. My plans vanished when I unlocked my apartment door. Mark's car was next to Judy's. I quietly entered, not jingling my keys. Their grunting drowned out any noise. Do me! Pound me! Judy's words hit me hard. She was bent over the couch as Mark jackhammered her. I thought about kicking him, but his legs were too close. I punched him in the side, knocking him off her. "The witch, you creep!" he yelled, realizing what happened. Mark quickly grabbed me by my suit coat. I tried to punch him and reach my pistol, but my coat was restrictive. He shook me violently. My kicks barely affected him. Judy turned and grabbed my right arm, preventing me from drawing my weapon. Her nails gouged my arm, causing the 3 furrows. Mark half lifted me, charged across the living room, and threw me out the door. I flew down the stairs, hearing a crunch as I hit the ground. Listening to the cops, I quickly formulated a plan. I moaned loudly, signaling I was awake. The doctor checked me out, concluding I was basically intact, but should limit movement. The cops asked for my story. I told them almost everything, including how I caught Mark and Judy in the act. I added that Mark threatened to eliminate me and called me a loser. Judy urged him to act quickly, knowing I had a weapon. Mark threw me down the stairs, and that's all I remembered. I didn't feel bad about lying. Screw both of them. I hoped there was no contrary evidence. Forensics supported my story. Mark claimed he defended himself against my attack. He said he was visiting Judy because she felt bad, and I misunderstood. Judy said Mark pushed me hard and she grabbed my arm to stop me from striking him, causing the scratches. Investigators found Mark's seed on my pants, proving proximity. Smears of seed and vulvas fluids on my right leg showed I kicked him in the groin. I was facing him, not running. Mark wasn't charged with attempted felony, but with assault. He posted bail, costing him $5,000. I wondered if he thought it was worth it. I wouldn't know the full story for a while. My brothers didn't tell me everything until the doctors said I was out of danger to keep me calm. Shortly after giving my statement to the cops, I passed out. To me, it felt like no time had passed when I woke up in a dim room, thinking about my conversation with the cops. I decided how I'd respond to Judy and Mark if I saw them again. They were cheaters who wanted me dead, and I'd treat them accordingly. Just before passing out, I had planned to shoot Mark. If he ever approached me, I'd claim I thought he was coming to finish the job. A nurse was in the room, and then I saw Judy. I yelled, "Get her out! She tried to eliminate me! Get her out!" My brother rushed in. Judy, shocked and crying, protested, "I didn't hurt you. I love you." "You helped him throw me down the stairs," I yelled. They ushered Judy out, still protesting. I did want to talk to her, to hear her explain why she sought rough lovemaking elsewhere instead of talking to me. If she wanted rough role play, I would have been happy to oblige, but I couldn't condone her cheating. The doctors kept me in the hospital for a week due to my concussion, fearing brain swelling. My brothers visited regularly and camped out in my room the first couple of days. They could barely believe what I said about Judy. I whispered to John, "I exaggerated her role in trying to eliminate me." John looked puzzled. "Why would you do that?" "I can always back off later," I said. "For now, I want her to suffer. She cheated and destroyed our marriage. Tell Dave. I'm paranoid about recordings, so I won't say more here." John chuckled. "You're really something." The day I got out of the hospital, I told John how I bugged Judy's phone. "Tell her I'm hurt and angry, but we'll talk when I'm ready." John grinned. "Give her a little hope, like she gave you before crushing it." I was angry but still loved her, which made it hurt more. Julie, Mark's wife, visited me the day after I woke up. She had heard parts of what happened. When charges are filed, the details aren't publicized. Julie sat down, concerned. "Why was Mark arrested for assaulting you?" Mark had told her the same lie he told the police. He was visiting Judy, and I jumped to conclusions, leading to a scuffle where I fell down the stairs. He claimed innocence, unaware of the video or forensic evidence. I wondered if he was delusional, or hoping the neighbors wouldn't be questioned. "They were having lovemaking when I walked in," I told Julie. Julie nodded. "Mark said you claim he was having an affair, but it was innocent." "I'm not buying that. Do you have proof?" I asked. Julie sighed. "I have a prenup. I get 70% of the communal assets if he cheated, and I can prove it. I plan to sue him after his criminal trial. Contact an attorney and file for divorce to lock your assets so he can't use them for his defense. I have an audio recording of their affair, text copies, and a video of them unclothed on the landing after he threw me down the stairs. My clothes might have evidence too," I said. Julie looked shocked. "You have all that?" I nodded. I knew Mark liked rough lovemaking, and that convinced her. "I have everything." Julie stood up, determined. "I'm going to see my lawyer. Please help me get the rest of that evidence as soon as you can." I assured her, "I will, Julie. Mark and Judy have no idea how much evidence there is against them. They're sticking to their lie, telling the cops I overreacted. Mark's probably doing damage control, maybe even hiding money, but you can get that back. Hopefully, what he forfeits to the bail bondsman comes out of his share." Julie hugged me and wished me well before leaving. I had met her at Mark's parties. She was nice and didn't deserve the mess coming her way. Neither did I. The day after leaving the hospital, I was at my family's fishing camp, planning to take medical leave and use my vacation time. My boss knew the situation and was finding a way for me to work remotely. As I recuperated and still got paid, I thought about how I turned their cheating into a crime. I had been pushed down the stairs, not due to my own clumsiness. Mark might have just wanted to get his pants on without getting shot, but I didn't care. I wanted to go for his jugular. That morning, I canceled our credit card, leaving Judy her half of the balance, which wasn't much. I waited to avoid tipping my hand too early. Now, I wouldn't provide a penny for Judy until the court ordered me to. Rent and utilities were paid, but she'd get nothing more. Julie moved swiftly, taking her 70% of the available cash and locking their investment accounts. I wanted answers. I called Judy and told her where I was. She had begged my brothers to let her talk to me while I was in the hospital. I told her to come alone. If she brought Mark, I'd assume he was coming after me and act accordingly. I wanted that on record to deter another attack. It was a tearful meeting. I loved Judy, but not as much as before. She loved me, but not enough to stay loyal. "I'm glad you let me come to talk," she said, parking. "You know I wasn't helping Mark try to eliminate you," she began. I shrugged and invited her inside, claiming I felt weak, and asked her to get us drinks. She knew the house well. While she got beers from the fridge, I set up video recordings focused on the chair where she'd sit. "I'm wondering if you're trying to get me to say something on a recording," I started. She assured me she wasn't. "My phone is in my purse," she said, then stripped unclothed to prove she had nothing on her. "Want to do a cavity search?" she teased, moving her hips. She was smiling, thinking this was a kinky game. I might have been interested if she hadn't been screwing her boss. "You might want to get dressed while we talk," I said. "Screw that," she replied. "I'll stay unclothed. Give me a towel so I don't leave a snail trail on the chair. Are you sure you don't want to check if I have a recorder hidden?" she asked, grinning. "Please, take your time feeling around." She wasn't being sarcastic. She genuinely wanted to play. She knew the effect she had on me and was playing me. She had an agenda. "Where do you want to start?" she asked. "Let's start with why. Not why you cheated, but why you helped that fool try to eliminate me," I spat, trying to control myself. "I wasn't trying to help him," Judy said tearfully. "I was trying to protect myself. I had no idea he'd push you. I wanted to stop you from shooting him. Even when he pushed you outside, I thought he'd just close the door so we could get dressed and deal with it. But then he threw me down the stairs," I finished. She nodded, looking horrified and guilty. "I was afraid you were dead. He pushed you so hard you flew into the air. When I saw you lying there, not moving, I was terrified. You didn't even check on me. The police said Cheryl from next door was kneeling by me, while you stood on the landing in a robe, crying," I said. "You went inside, Mark got dressed, and you made up a story about me misunderstanding the situation and attacking him. No mention of catching you two having lovemaking." "I didn't describe it that way," Judy paused. "How do you know what we said?" "The cops interrogated me. They heard two people tell one story and I told another. With a head injury, they wanted to make sure I didn't misinterpret things. They charged Mark with assault, not attempted felony." "Why did you lie for him?" "I was scared," Judy said. "Mark told me if you had a head injury, you might not remember anything. We made up a quick story. Mark thought he could get away with it." "You were willing to go that far to cover for him?" I asked, aghast. "He said he'd make it up to me. If the truth came out, he'd lose everything and we'd both go to jail," Judy sobbed. "If you survived, it would be your word against ours. We had to keep up the lie even after we knew you'd be okay. Mark kept saying maybe you'd have amnesia. Do you remember everything?" I said. "You're worried about his prenup with his wife, aren't you? I already told her what I saw. She needs proof to invoke it." "Your word isn't enough," Judy said. "Mark asked me to tell you he'll pay you $5,000, $2,500 each. If you change your story about him pushing you and us having lovemaking, we can use it for counseling. I'll quit my job and we can get back together." I hadn't expected this. "Nonsense," I spat. "Do you think I'd cover for him? Plus, his wife would find out if he moved that kind of money. He can't buy a candy bar without her knowing." "He's been hiding money in an offshore account for years," Judy said. "He's been putting money in a royal bank account in Grand Cayman under his oldest son's name. He'll give us some if you change your story. Please, Robert, we can have a nest egg and get back to where we were. Mark means nothing to me. You are what I want. I want a family with you," she pleaded. I chuckled. "Do you see the holes in your story? Even if I lie and say I was confused, do you think Mark would pay us? He'd laugh at how he fooled me again. He made me a loser, and now I'd be a dumb loser changing my story. He'd never confess to you about hiding money. He knows you're gullible and hopes I am too. If it were true, he'd keep it secret." Judy looked thoughtful, then shook her head. "I'm sure we can trust him," she said. "Before I consider anything, I need to see the bank transfer, including routing and account numbers, proving the account exists. Then I might consider letting him go for $100,000. "Okay, now for part two," I said. "Why did you let that guy in your pants in the first place? What did I do to deserve that? Not man enough for you anymore?" She teared up slightly. "How long have you known? When did you find out?" I shook my head silently. "You did nothing wrong. We had a great marriage and an active bed life, at least until you got sick with that stomach bug and cut me off." "Oh, crap. That's when you found out," she said tearfully. She sat casually, not bothering to cover up. Now she looked embarrassed and reached for her clothes. "Okay," I said, breaking the silence. "When did it begin?" "About 3 months ago. At first, we didn't even have lovemaking. I'm not sure why I started. We had no problems. Mark flirted a lot, but I didn't take it seriously. One day he said he was unhappy with his bed life at home. Like a fool, I listened. He missed the wild, rough lovemaking he used to have. That night, I jumped your bones. We had amazing lovemaking, but I didn't tell you why. I've thought about that night a lot. The memory of it almost makes me climax." Judy paused, watching me. I stayed silent, clenching my fists. She continued. "I wanted that high again, a carnal high. That weekend, we screwed like rabbits. The next week, Mark and I talked. I told him about our wild weekend. He hinted he could give me that any time. I laughed, but eventually I wanted to see if he could. I craved that hard, pounding lovemaking. Finally, I let him try to get me off. That was my downfall. Mark doesn't make love. He screws like a demon. I didn't kiss him or do anything else. I just let him have me. It was hot. I was like independent, Judy admitted tearfully. I loved you, but with him, I could disassociate from reality. It was something I couldn't do with someone I loved. Remember that evening when you got a text about how fine you looked and how Mark wanted to drill you? I asked. Judy nodded. You covered neatly. If you had stopped seeing him, I might have never known. She bristled and said, I hate that word. But you liked the idea. You loved cheating on me because you kept doing it despite the risk, I said. She shook her head in denial. Well, I hope you have fun with him, I said quietly. Get dressed and leave. Our time is up. She looked shocked. Can't you claim me? Make me yours again? She pleaded. Bend me over and do me hard until I cry and beg you to stop. Just please don't send me away. I handed her the discarded pants. There's nothing to reclaim. You gave yourself to him, I said. Without another word, she put on her pants, picked up her shoes and purse, and walked outside. She paused, hoping I'd call her back. I'm so sorry, Robert, she said before getting into her car and driving away. I turned off the recordings and made copies, sending the files to the cloud for safekeeping. I called Sergeant Bergeron. This is Robert LeBlanc. I have a video you might find interesting. While making video copies, my phone alerted me to Judy's call. I'm just driving home from meeting Robert, she said. His memory is perfect. He remembers every detail. I'm glad you didn't come. He might have shot you. Recording the conversation was a bad idea. He called me on it. I stripped unclothed to show I wasn't wired. He's that pissed. I even begged him to take me to bed. What a fool, Mark scoffed. He's a full looser, too chicken for even revenge lovemaking. Good thing he has no proof we're screwing. His claims are worthless. We're screwing, corrected Judy. Yeah, we have to cool it. My wife might be watching me. She needs proof for the prenup. If I can get a 50-50 split and no alimony, I'd keep the brokerage. I could still earn a living. I can't support myself if Robert divorces me, Judy said. Even with alimony, I hope he gets over it. I'll do anything. Counseling, a chastity belt, postnuptial agreement. Why bother with the looser? Mark scoffed. I'll send sales your way to keep you afloat, but we need to keep it quiet. No lovemaking for now, at least until I clear the assault charge. What did he say about taking the money? He said no way. He might go for $100K, but he'd need to see the transfer first. He believes you're lying about the account and wouldn't pay anyway, Judy said. Well, he's probably right. If he contradicted his statement and asked for money, I might spit in his hand, Mark laughed. Maybe give him 25 up front, then accuse him of blackmail if he asked for more. 100? I could have him liquidated for less. If you say that again, I'll confess to the cops myself, Judy said. I'll make a video confession and give it to others for safekeeping. If Robert so much as gets dizzy and falls, I'll turn you in. Hey, Mark backpedaled. I was just spouting off. I'd never do that. I don't think Judy believed him. I was on my toes. I recorded that conversation too. Sergeant Bergeron came to the camp since it was nearby. I wondered if Mark really had a secret account. But why would he tell anyone? Maybe he revealed it to Judy without thinking, just like he talked about having me liquidated. Bergeron was impressed with the video of my conversation with Judy, although he didn't comment on her appearance. He took it to the associate district attorney handling the case. This is icing on the cake. We got the forensic results. You had seed spatters on your pants and a smear of seed and vulvas secretions on your leg. We'll compare it with their DNA before the trial. We also found matching spatters on the sofa and carpet, even a few toward the door. It supports your story. We might upgrade the charges against Mark to attempted felony. Judy might be charged too. Your skin and blood were under her fingernails, so she definitely grabbed you. Her claim she was stopping you from pulling your pistol could be used either way. I asked if I had the right to defend myself. Bergeron explained. A good lawyer can spin things. Mark didn't strike you, but he's a big man who could have. He'll deny saying he'd eliminate you. It comes down to the jury. Since you didn't shoot him, it doesn't matter much. But don't be surprised if his lawyer tries something wild. That evening, my father-in-law called. He heard I'd been hurt, but was released from the hospital. We were on a cruise, just got back and turned on our phones. We had messages saying you fell, might die, then that you'd be okay, and finally that you were discharged. Are you okay? Bill, those messages don't tell the whole story, I replied. I liked him and his wife. I didn't fall. I was pushed. Judy's boss tried to eliminate me. I caught them having lovemaking in my living room. It's a mess. He was shocked. I heard him tell my mother-in-law, who wailed. You need to talk with Judy and hear her side, I sighed. I'm not at home. We hung up. I called my attorney the next morning to check on the divorce paperwork. Papers were ready. They just needed to know where Judy was. The process server had checked the real estate office and my apartment but found her at neither place. Bergeron called to say they arrested Mark and Judy at work. He took the audio and video files to the assistant district attorney, who filed all the charges. The assistant DA wanted to see me. Bergeron went with me and cautioned me about talking about the bribe to change my story. It could be construed that you were willing if the price was right, he said. I assured him Mark didn't have enough money to buy me off. I wanted the bank information to pass to Julie Danvers. I already called her and she's having her lawyer look into it. He had me write a statement to that effect. It's best to leave the investigating to others. We can't use illegally obtained information. It's called fruit of the poisonous tree, but your video is legal because you're in it. Mark was charged with attempted felony. Judy was charged as an accomplice. The DA didn't think assault charges would stick against her, but didn't want her to get off scot-free. With accomplice charges, she could get a $500 fine and up to 5 years in jail. I thought that was ridiculous. Bergeron laughed. The law is screwy sometimes. Danvers will likely go down. The DA suggested being lenient on Judy if she testifies against Mark. That seemed like all the satisfaction I'd get. At least Judy wouldn't get off completely. I hated what she did, but didn't want her to be burned too badly. I called my lawyer to tell him where she was. She would be served when released. My brother John came with me to retrieve the rest of my clothes from the apartment. I only wanted my clothes, my desktop computer, and a few pistols I had locked in the safe. Everything else would remind me too much of Judy and the short life we built together. We were nearly done packing the last items when Sandy, Judy's mother, drove up. We were stacking boxes on the landing. She hugged me tightly. I can't believe my daughter would throw away what she had for a little fling, she tearfully lamented. Do you think there's any way you could work through this? Before I could respond, she continued. I'm not talking about forgiving her right away. I mean after a lot of counseling. Just before Bill and I left on our cruise, Judy mentioned you guys were going to start trying for a baby. We were so excited about that. I looked at Rachel, Judy's 22-year-old sister, who had come with their mother to get some of Judy's things. She was shaking her head. I can't tell you how much this tears me up, I confessed. I have video and audio that show just how bad it was. Judy doesn't know I have any of it. Both she and her boyfriend think it's my word against theirs. You have proof? Sandy asked, surprised. Judy made it seem like the affair was just a little fling. She regretted it, but you were totally unforgiving. This wasn't a little fling, it went on for months. What I have is damning, I said. Some of it is pretty bad. Nudity, bad language, the works. I don't think you should see it. Screw that, Robert, Sandy said firmly. I'm a big girl. You always were polite and avoided cursing in front of Bill and me. I probably use worse language than you. And I know what unclothed people having lovemaking look like. So does Bill. I want to see and hear everything you have. I'm guessing from your demeanor that the files will show my daughter as a complete strumpet. It's bad, isn't it? I nodded. I didn't want Judy to claim I was just an unforgiving idiot over a little indiscretion that went south quickly. It's bad. I really don't want to hurt you, I said. I told you I want to see what you have, Sandy insisted. Cheating pisses me off. I don't care if it was you or Judy. I had plenty of chances to screw around on Bill over the years. Some of the offers were tempting, but I never did. I agreed to give her the audio portion of my meeting with Judy and the other audio files. Judy is going to need your support, I said. She's in for a tough legal battle. Sandy nodded. We'll support her, but that doesn't mean we'll condone what she did, Sandy said. I told them I was moving out and Judy could stay, but Sandy said Judy would live with them for now. At Rachel's insistence, she went to pack some of Judy's clothes. Damn, this is some crap, Rachel said. I agreed. You only know part of it. I was 17 when you and Judy got together. I was dating a guy on the football team. Not having lovemaking, just going out. Mom made a big deal about how Judy hit the jackpot. She found a great guy who would stick by her forever like Dad. You weren't big and handsome, but decent looking and hot in your own way. Someone a girl could count on to love her. Smart and loyal. I laughed. You're making me sound like a border collie. A-hole, Rachel said, grinning. You know what I mean. I got to know you. I envied my sister. I dated guys looking for someone like you. Never found one. Rachel hugged me. I'm just gonna say it. If my sister is so dumb she'd give you up, I want you. I've loved you for a long time. I just want you to know I'm here. I didn't know how to react. I hugged Rachel and told her I appreciated her love. She smiled and kissed me, giving me a heart-on. All 3 women in Judy's family had that effect on me. I told Rachel Judy didn't have to move out of the apartment. I would be living at my family's fish camp outside of town. Rachel shook her head. Mama's pissed Judy screwed up a good thing. She wants her back at home to tell her how she messed up and to keep an eye on her. I offered for Judy to live with me, but Mom shut that down, Rachel said. I'm just graduating, and Mom doesn't want me saddled with Judy. She says I need to live my own life and deal with my own decisions. She repeated that 100 times on the way over. John began carrying my things to the car. The doctor had warned me about strenuous activity, so John was doing all the heavy work. My cast didn't help either. I have your phone number. I know where your fish camp is. Get ready for me, Rachel said with a grin. She leaned forward and whispered she hoped I might be ready for some exertions soon. Hey there, I heard from behind me. It was Cheryl, the woman from across the landing. I see you're up and about. Then she noticed the boxes on the landing. I hope you aren't trying to carry any of those. You know you're not supposed to lift anything. You had a pretty bad concussion. How did you know how bad I was hurt and what my doctor's orders were? I asked. I want to thank you for helping me when I got hurt. I heard you were right there checking me out. Cheryl tugged at the name tag on her scrub top. I work in critical care, right around the corner from where you were. I mainly do cardiac instead of neuro. Greta, the nurse taking care of you, was my roommate in nursing school. I kept tabs on you, she said. The doctor said I only had a little swelling. Yeah, that's like saying you had a little heart attack or are a little pregnant, Cheryl laughed. I looked at your chart and we nurses share information on the unit. You had a significant injury. You need to take it easy. Just because they say 7 to 10 days, my advice is to make that a minimum. I knew she was a nurse, but not the details. Judy and I had invited her over a few times. She had shared snippets of her personal life. I liked her. I told her my brother was doing all the carrying and loading. I was only packing my clothes. I thanked her again for saving my life. She snorted. I was scared, to be honest. I don't do neuro, but I was trained. I was afraid you had broken your neck. Cervical breaks can stop respiration. If you quit breathing, I'd have a hell of a time doing CPR in the position you were in. I just loosened your tie and opened the top of your shirt, checking your eyes upside down. Like that was helping your cranial pressure. But I couldn't do anything to help that. I had nothing to stabilize your neck, so moving you was out of the question. I was glad you didn't start to wake up and move around, but the ambulance arrived pretty quickly. Do you still have the video you took? I asked. She said her mother had taken all the pictures and videos, but she had copies. She asked for my phone number so she could forward them. I watched the video. Rachel looked at it as well. Well, there's no doubt what they were doing. Judy is going to freak out when I tell her about seeing her freshly drilled look, Rachel giggled. Cheryl said, I'm guessing you are Judy's sister. You look like her. We stood there for a minute. Then Cheryl gave me a hug, whispering in my ear, You have my number now. Call me when you want to talk to someone out loud, she said. Take care of yourself, Robert. Do everything slow and easy. No exertion. She turned and went to her apartment. I wasn't sure if she put a little extra wiggle in her step or if it was just my imagination. John was amused as we drove away. Your mother-in-law would jump your bones in a heartbeat if she were single. She is one classy lady, but loves her husband and won't cheat. I looked over at him. Judy's sister wants you too. Now, she'd jump into your bed quick. All you gotta do is let her... I shook my head. Plus that neighbor, the nurse. She wants you too. You think? Wasn't I listening? Yeah, kinda messed up. But you have options, little brother. He laughed halfway to the fish camp. I wanted the divorce to be as easy as possible. I wanted to get it done quickly. I had my lawyer offer Judy that I would pay half her rent and utilities if she stayed in the apartment alone. I'd even pay half her grocery bill as long as it was food bought for her alone and not takeout or at a restaurant. I'd even keep her on my cell phone plan. I offered this support for 2 years, saying she could use that time to get on her feet. Judy's lawyer quickly computed this was far more in her favor than the percentage of my income the law specified. I knew he told her how restrictive it would be, but she accepted my terms and signed. Of course, Judy had bigger things to worry about than our impending divorce. She had been accused of being an accomplice after the fact for helping Mark attempt felony. She was released on her own recognizance. She hadn't been charged the first time, only questioned. Mark Danvers did not fare so well. The charge of attempted felony called for another bail to be set and a percentage paid. Mark only had a little cash available. Julie had taken her 70% of their cash and sealed their investment accounts. He couldn't touch any of that money. He didn't have the $1,000 to pay the bondsman fee. His lawyer was trying to get him a signature loan. Apparently, having the community assets locked in a divorce made it difficult to use as collateral. I laughed, imagining him stewing in a jail cell. Mark considered himself a mover and a shaker. Now he was being moved and shaken. Julie was as vindictive as me. I had told her about the alleged secret account in the Caribbean under her son's name. She said she would check it out. To my surprise, the secret account really did exist. Julie's lawyer confirmed it. So she, Julie, and her son flew down to get the money. Her son wasn't on the signature card, but because it was in his name, he could transfer the funds. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall when Mark found out his hidden money was gone. Because it was in his son's name, it wasn't part of the community property. To make things worse for poor Mark, he would soon be facing problems with the IRS. He did not follow proper procedure for gifting minors. However, it worked out, and whoever paid the taxes, Mark would never get a penny. I loved it, Julie told me later. Her son split the money evenly with his two siblings, funding their college accounts as well. The Danvers boys were at least honest with each other. Justice is slow. My divorce with Judy was finalized months before her criminal trial. Her trial was linked with Mark's, as she was accused of helping him hide his role in my attack. Julie had ensured his resources were limited. He still had his 30% of their community assets, but it wasn't much. His real estate agents were ready to quit because of his ruined reputation. Julie got Mark to agree to sign off and sell the franchise. She could have forced the issue, but his signing expedited things. As part of the agreement, he gave up the right to start another brokerage within 50 miles for 5 years. I loved it. He needed the money for his defense, so he agreed. While we waited for the criminal trial, I propositioned Julie for a little roll in the hay. Her initial response was to call me a sick mother. Then, a few seconds later, she grinned and said, "You really want to stick it to them, don't you?" We laughed about staging a fake video, but then she said if she did anything at all, she'd go for the whole enchilada. In the end, we decided against it. The week before he was to get the money to make bail, she visited him. I went with her. We talked through a plexiglass window. He asked why I was there, and Julie said, "Because I deserve to be." She winked at Mark and grinned. I held my index and middle finger over my mouth and flicked my tongue. Then subtly, I pushed my index finger through the circle made by my other index finger and thumb. Mark glared and turned red. He paused for a few seconds before reacting. I thought he'd get angry, but I was astonished by his actions. He went ape crap. I found out later there are many rules when in lockup. One of the main ones is about losing one's temper. Mark picked up his chair and swung it repeatedly against the plexiglass window. He was immediately and painfully subdued. I heard later he was put into segregation for 3 weeks. His bail got delayed and was almost denied altogether because he now posed a threat to both Julie and me. He really should learn to control his temper. At his trial, he spent half his time glaring at me instead of following the testimony. He should never have taken the stand, not after I claimed he wanted to eliminate me, having called me a loser repeatedly. When asked if he threatened to eliminate me, he said, "I don't remember saying it at first, but right now I'd make sure of it." Then he began to rant, calling me a lying chicken, a loser, and a few other things that cast aspersions on my father's identity and my mother's species. I have to admit, I had deliberately antagonized the man a bit, careful not to be seen. I had just repeated the gestures of pushing one index finger into a circle made by the other index finger and thumb. I had held my index and middle finger in a V and flicked my tongue between them just a few seconds before. I did it subtly so nobody else noticed. The man was now livid despite being carefully reserved. A few minutes before, his lawyer looked stricken. The forensics bore out the fact he had indeed attacked me and moved me some 15 feet to the top of the stairs, where he threw me to my pass-away. Now saying he would eliminate me if he could did not help his case. Mark's lawyer was fairly good. The lawyer tried to convince the jury Mark was justifiably upset, as his only real crime was having lovemaking with a married woman and defending himself from an angry husband with a weapon. Mark had lost his career, his marriage, and his freedom. He had been stricken a few times in jail. His present state of mind was influenced by PTSD, so his actions should be forgiven. The lawyer managed to cast enough doubt. Mark only got sentenced to 10 years in jail rather than a possible 15. Even after he got angry at me in court, Judy was called back to the stand to repeat her testimony. She never heard Mark threaten to eliminate me in the apartment, but on cross by the DA, she admitted he had said he might hire somebody to eliminate me. She was very upset at Mark's violent rant in the courtroom. She had said earlier that it was Mark who had originally concocted the story of how he was merely visiting her, and I overreacted, then ran. When Mark stood up to confront me, she admitted the fall was not accidental, but a very deliberate action on Mark's part. At her own trial, she repeated that testimony, saying she was terrified at the time and thought I was dead. She agreed to support Mark's lie. She was sentenced to a year in the parish jail, but the DA suggested it be suspended. The judge disagreed and wanted her to serve 3 months at least, considering her original false statement to the police. Judy came to see me when she got out. She wanted to apologize for cheating on me. We had not talked in private since the day we talked at the fish camp. "I also want to thank you for not spreading the video you took when we talked," she said. "It was bad enough you gave Mom the audio portion. I was a strumpet to strip and beg like that. But I wanted to be your strumpet. Mom gave me a little crap about that. But she really read me the riot act for cheating on you and destroying our marriage. It was bad enough just knowing what I did. But she saw the video Cheryl's mom took. She told me if you weren't such a gentleman, you'd have let everybody see me unclothed and freshly screwed, disgracing the whole family. I knew she would. Is there any way we can get back together? I was hoping with counseling or a postnup. Well, it would be a prenup now." I shook my head. A prenup did not stop Mark. "I'm not Mark. I got stupid. I should have talked to you. Can we stay friends? I mean, we'll need to if you date my sister. Rachel told me she wants to get with you someday." I told her I had written that off as well. Judy left after wishing me well and hoping I would forgive her someday. While I liked Rachel and the whole family, there was no way it would work. It would only cause friction in the family eventually. And although I was still hurt by her disrespect, I did not want her family to suffer. I wondered how Mark was handling life in jail. I laughed at the thought, betting he got into a fight or two. I'm trying to find out how he's doing. Julie said she's going to visit him with her boys. Since 2 are under 18, she has to go along. She wants to ask him if he's giving heads to fellow inmates when the boys can't hear. I did hear about Mark. A few months later, he was moved to a new unit after being in segregation. I didn't know what he did, but they apparently did not like his attitude. He was found unconscious in a corner of the shower room, obviously kicked repeatedly in the groin. Most of his toiletries were shoved up his rectum, a full bar of soap, followed by his toothbrush and toothpaste. Once those were removed, it was clear he had been sodomized first. I sent him a smiley face greeting card saying, "If you think I paid someone to do it, well, you are absolutely right." Throughout my court hearings, I made some friends who had connections in the jail administration. They knew people behind bars who really needed cigarette money. Although she called me several times trying to change my mind, I never did date Rachel, Judy's sister. She argued her parents thought it wouldn't be a problem, and Judy was on board with us getting together, but I knew it would eventually cause friction. I broke off all contact, though I occasionally saw one of them around town. Judy moved to Shreveport and got a job as a sales rep for a small manufacturing company. I imagine a woman as attractive as her had an active bed life. I also had an active bed life with Cheryl. Cheryl and I dated, and then she moved in with me. A year later, we got married and decided to have a baby right away. Good communication is crucial for us, and she shares my views on fidelity. I know I'll have to be careful someday. When Mark gets out of prison, I half hope he gets shivved. Maybe I need to spend some more cigarette money. Okay, I'm still a bit of a prick, but only to those who try to hurt me.
DNA test reveals my wife cheated on our wedding day with my best friend, leading to ultimate revenge. "I'm out of here," I declared. "Fine, and don't bother coming back," my wife shot back. Normally I'd toss out a "go to hell" as I stormed out, but today I aimed for more civilized parting words. We've slung similar barbs over our 14 years hitched, but this time I won't be circling back. In a few days she'll grasp what I meant this round. Over the past half year or so, Jenna, my wife, turned into a verbal wrecking ball. I couldn't figure it. Her jabs, to put it mildly, stung. I started dodging her to keep things from boiling over. Each day, I'd stall longer in the car. Sometimes, I'd slip back home after Jenna and Carrie, our 13-year-old, finished supper. I had to take care of me. Sometimes, there'd be leftovers. Lately, though, it seems they vanished before I return. I go by Kurt Kaminsky. Technically, it's David Kurt Kaminsky, but my old man's also a David, so they dubbed me Kurt from the start to sidestep confusion. Nope, not a junior, Dad's David John Kaminsky. Why he skipped the junior bit, I can't fathom. I'd happily answer to junior or even DJ, but nope, just Kurt. Or Nat. Yep, I'm Polish. Well, sort of an American with Polish roots. Heard all the jokes, well, most of them. They keep turning out new ones each year. As the lone Pole I know, apart from Dad, in this 10,000-strong town, I've become the punchline. Technically, I'm half Polish. The other half, from Mom's side, is German, French, Irish, and English. But since I'm a Kaminsky, I'm a Pole. My soon-to-be ex-wife ain't who I thought. I only caught wind of this 4 weeks back. As I said, I was keeping clear of her due to the mess. After a few dinners missed, one Monday evening, I hit a diner. In a booth, ready to order, I overheard two guys chatting in the next booth. Caught a phrase with Pole and tuned in. So, how long you been with the Pole's missus since they tied the knot? Heck, I even betted her on their wedding day, and he's clueless. The first voice, unknown. But the second, I knew. My best bud, George Carey. I froze. They kept yakking, but I heard zilch until George spilled, "Yeah, we rendezvous at least twice a month." Kurt's so clueless he doesn't even know what's going on. Dumb luck, just then the waitress came to take my order. Quietly, I murmured, "Sorry, got a jet." I bolted, making sure they didn't catch sight of me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Jenna, my wife, with my closest buddy, the guy who stood by me at the altar. He's also my go-to mechanic, and that's not changing anytime soon. Well, not officially my mechanic, more like an exclusive contractor I rely on solely to fix and inspect all my cars. In case you're wondering, I run a used car dealership. Yeah, I'm a used car salesman. Heard all the jokes and jabs, but business is booming. People trust they're getting top-notch cars at fair prices, and if any issues crop up, I handle them. George has always been a top-notch mechanic, and I keep him busy and compensated well. I wanted to bring him on as staff, but he cracked a joke about not respecting himself if he worked for a Pole. Said it in jest, but I sensed he meant it. Still, I took him on as an independent contractor, though he wasn't all that independent. Truth is, I was his sole source of income, and that fact will be his undoing. Leaving the diner, I cruised the streets, doubting what I'd heard. Was it true, or just his boasting? I might have hired a PI, but if what he said was legit, their meetups were sparse. Might end up a waste of cash, but I decided to snoop through her phone and email. Back home, Jenna was her usual self. Fine by me, I needed the truth before talking to her. When she dozed off, I checked her email, clean. Her phone was locked, but it didn't take me long to crack it. Our daughter's birth date. Found a few sketchy messages, but nothing from George. His name in her contacts wasn't odd, considering he was my pal. Maybe he was just talking trash, I thought. Yet her recent behavior hinted something's amiss. Perhaps not with George, but someone else. I hit the hay, restless. It was past 2:43 a.m. when I finally drifted off. The next day at the dealership, George cracked his usual Polish jokes. I usually let them slide, but today I snapped. "George, what do you even know about Poland? Bet you couldn't find it on a map if your life depended on it. You joke about Poles being dim, but I'm sure they could locate the U.S., maybe even our state. Get to work." George stared, lost for words. He knew I was on to something. He wasn't the academic type, more street smart, good with engines, not textbooks. I guess that's why we hung out in high school. I'd help him with his studies, ensuring he graduated. Now I'm reconsidering our friendship. He got me thinking about picking a spouse. I retreated to my office, shut the door, and mulled over how to gather evidence. Confronting them both head-on wouldn't fly, they'd just brush it off. I needed solid proof. I rang up a PI in Santa Fe and laid out my worries. He reckoned monitoring them would cost a pretty penny given their sporadic meetups. You could slap a tracker on her phone. At least you'll know its whereabouts when you check. Or set up cameras at home, but unless they're top-notch, and by that I mean pricey, they'll likely get spotted. Even with fancy gear, if she's alert, she'll probably catch on. If I were you, I'd tag her phone and hope to catch them red-handed. He suggested a tracking program and waived off payment. "Consider it a freebie," he said. "Everything I told you is online anyway." Still, you came through with valuable advice. "Expect a check," I insisted. "If you ever swing by Silver City, drop by Kaminsky's lot," he offered. "I don't usually venture out that way, but if I do, I'll look you up," I replied, and I sensed he meant it. A big part of my sales success came from making folks feel important. Early on, I learned folks crave validation. I opted for the tracking software, saving cash and hassle on cameras Jenna might spot. That night, when everyone was out cold, I sneaked up and installed the tracking app on her phone, syncing it with mine. It'll run in the background, unbeknownst to her. Finally, I slept soundly. The next day at work, I kept tabs on the app. Jenna worked part-time at the uni bookstore, 15 to 20 hours a week. She called her earnings mad money and splurged at the salon. She hit the grocery store and later was back home. George was home most of the day, but whenever Jenna was in, he was out working, so at least for that day, I figured nothing had gone down. That evening, I tried being more civil to my wife and daughter, suggesting dinner out. My wife seemed somewhat responsive. Our daughter, typical teen, hesitated, but I insisted. Dinner went smoothly. I casually brought up George and Jenna shifted uncomfortably, swiftly changing the subject, fueling my suspicions. I want to find out if George's words hold water. I've got to get to the bottom of this somehow. That night, I refrained from checking her phone. My attempts to peek at her calls or texts came up empty. Either she swiftly deleted them or didn't make any at all. Climbing into bed, I thanked Jenna. "Thanks for joining us for dinner." "Thank you, Kurt. It was a nice surprise," she replied, meeting my gaze. "You might be in luck tonight. It's been a while, and like I mentioned, we haven't been getting along lately." After her usual nightly routine in the bathroom, Jenna nestled beside me. I felt conflicted about the possibility of closeness with her. If she had been unfaithful, did I even want it? I resolved to let her take the lead. Until I had solid evidence, I wouldn't initiate. We did end up being physically engaged, but it was rather ordinary, no need for specifics. Well, at least I enjoyed it. Throughout the week, I kept tabs on her phone's location, finding nothing out of the ordinary. On Saturday night, while she slept, I checked her phone for any messages or calls, yet again finding nothing. I was close to convincing myself that George was just blowing smoke, trying to impress someone with his tales of conquests. This wasn't the first time I'd known him to do so since our school days. I tossed and turned in bed once more, my subconscious refusing to let me sleep. At 2 a.m., I lay there, staring at the ceiling, unable to drift off. I decided to go downstairs for a drink, hoping it might help me relax. Sitting with a glass of Jack Daniels and Coke in one hand and her phone in the other, I decided to check it once more. Entering the password, our daughter's birth date, I opened her phone to the home page. Suddenly, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. Our daughter's birth date was the key. Jenna's. Pregnancy had been challenging. We had feared losing her several times due to complications. There was an issue with her Rh factor not matching Jenna's, causing her body to reject the baby. Jenna spent the last 3 weeks of the pregnancy on bed rest to ensure the baby's safe delivery. And indeed, Carrie was born exactly 9 months after our wedding. We were overjoyed at her health, but she proved to be a demanding child. She cried incessantly, had trouble sleeping, and struggled with nursing. It was tough going. In Carrie's second year, Jenna firmly declared we weren't having another child. It saddened me, but truthfully, the baby had drained much of the joy from our lives. I mentioned that she was born 9 months after our wedding. They call such children wedding night babies because they're conceived on that night or during the honeymoon. A light bulb went off in my head. If George's claims were true, then there was a strong chance Jenna was already pregnant before our wedding night. Jenna was on the pill. No, we didn't wait until marriage to be physically engaged. It was a significant part of our relationship. The doctor speculated that the stress of the wedding might have interfered with her hormones, rendering the pills ineffective. Well, if the pills failed that night, they likely failed that day too. Now I know what to do. There's a 50 to 50% chance I'm not the father. You know the saying, the early bird gets the worm. Well, George might have been an early bird, but in his case it seems the early worm gets the birdie. I got off the couch and headed to the bathroom where I found some cotton swabs. Carrie was fast asleep in her room. She finally settled into a good sleep routine at 4 years old. Before that, it was a struggle. She lay there snoring with her mouth open. It was simple to gently swab the inside of her cheek with a Q-tip. She didn't even stir. After sealing it in a plastic bag, I repeated the process for myself. Even if Carrie turned out to be my biological daughter, it still left questions about Jenna's faithfulness. If she wasn't, but I pushed those thoughts aside for later consideration. Sunday was for chores, and we each had our tasks. I took my time, avoiding Jenna and Carrie, to keep my emotions in check. I was anxious to confirm my suspicions, but plagued by doubt all day. "Something on your mind, Kurt?" Jenna inquired. I needed a quick answer, so I replied, "I'm planning to buy a bunch of cars at the next auction to stock up the lot. Money might be tight until I make some sales." "Just don't overextend," she advised, always referring to the business as ours, though it was really mine. I'd say, set it up as a separate entity to protect my personal finances. Living in a religious community, I didn't want business decisions to affect my personal life negatively. I'm thinking of paying off the credit cards and keeping only one open to improve our credit, I told her. It was a tactic to mask my strategy in case she found out about it later. Do what you think is best, she responded indifferently. The idea came to me in a flash. It's amazing what your mind can do when you let it. This would minimize fallout if my suspicions proved true. So, bright and early Monday, I took the samples to Western New Mexico University and spoke with someone in the science department. They directed me to the department head, who welcomed the opportunity. I handed over some business cards and offered a 10% discount to anyone working on the samples. He seemed appreciative. I've been eyeing a new car to replace my Camry. I might swing by and check out your selection. If nothing catches my eye, I'll work with you to find something, I mentioned. Thank you, I'll keep that in mind, he replied. As I left the university, I knew I wore a smile, but it was tinged with worry. The test results could spell the end of my marriage. When I mentioned buying new cars to Jenna, it was merely a cover-up for my troubled thoughts, yet the idea started to grow on me. I summoned Paul, my accountant, loan officer, and occasional salesperson, into my office and shared my plans. We're going to make this work, I assured him. There's something else, Paul, I continued. I want to clear the mortgage on my house. Can we work out a lump sum payment? Let me crunch the numbers and get back to you after lunch, he replied, exiting my office. As he left, I pondered contacting my lawyer for a family law referral. But then I hesitated, thinking, hold your horses. Let's see the results first. I've yet to find concrete evidence of infidelity. After lunch, Paul presented the spreadsheet and we discussed the next moves for both plans. The following 2 days dragged on, each moment filled with anticipation for the DNA test results. Late Wednesday evening, the department head phoned, confirming the outcome and arranging a visit to discuss the car. When he arrived, I ushered him into my office. His expression said it all before he even spoke. The samples aren't related, he confirmed. I nodded, though the news hit hard, even though I'd half expected it. He gave me a moment before handing over the envelope with the results. When I glanced back up, my demeanor shifted. So, about that car you were eyeing, I inquired. Well, it might sound cliché, but I've hit the big 50 and I'm eyeing a sports car. Thinking of a Mazda Miata, he shared. Though I didn't have one in stock, I promised to scour the auction the next day for a well-kept one. I'll ring you this afternoon with any updates, I assured him as he left. I've told Anna I might leave early, but I'll be reachable if needed, I thought to myself, knowing she wouldn't call. She rarely required my assistance. She handled most tasks herself. As I drove around the city, everything seemed different. I made a call to my lawyer, who, though saddened by the news, directed me to a colleague he trusted. After the call, I booked an evening appointment. The next day, over a snack at a restaurant, I reflected, have I truly squandered the past 15 years? I couldn't even claim to have a child from this marriage. While I still regarded her as my child to some extent, biologically, she wasn't mine. What to do next? I couldn't pretend ignorance anymore. I'd been aware before, but now there was no turning back. One thing I was certain of, George would face consequences. It didn't matter that he'd been my closest friend for years. With friends like him, enemies seemed preferable. Jenna, too, would face repercussions. I wondered if she was aware that Carrie wasn't mine. Even if she wasn't, she kept this truth hidden from me, the secret of her infidelity on our wedding day with my best man, my supposed friend. Now I had no reason to doubt what I'd overheard. She indulged with him at least twice monthly. Anger began to well up inside me, and before it spiraled out of control, I knew I needed solitude, away from everyone. I should have called Jenna, informing her I wouldn't be home that evening. Going home was out of the question. I feared I might do something that would land me in jail. She picked up the call. Hello, Kurt. Hey, I'll be spending the night in Albuquerque to prep for the auction tomorrow at 8. Oh, I responded flatly. Well, okay then. Have a safe trip. I rarely ventured to Albuquerque for auctions, so this deviation was notable. I wondered if she'd exploit my absence for the night. She'd have to come up with an excuse regarding Carrie for my parents, which wouldn't be easy to explain. Nevertheless, I'd intermittently check her phone tracker throughout the evening to see if she ventured elsewhere. I navigated the roads to Albuquerque, aiming to purchase at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata. I'd arranged for their pickup and delivery to my lot post-auction. Now, the dilemma was who to entrust for their mechanical inspection. I knew George wouldn't get any further business from me once his current routine inspections and repairs were done. Upon hearing I'd acquired 24 cars, he'd likely envision dollar signs and inflate his charges, but that wasn't going to happen. I'd keep it under wraps until the last minute. I needed to consult with a local auction dealer to identify someone skilled and dependable to inspect them before shipping to our small town. Arriving in Albuquerque around 9 a.m., I checked into a Best Western hotel. Despite being the owner, I couldn't justify splurging on an expensive hotel using company funds. The room was comfortable, as was the bed, just what I needed. I'm a simple person with simple needs. Upon entering the room, I immediately checked Jenna's phone tracker, discovering she was still at home, or at least her phone was. Sleep proved elusive that night. I couldn't shake off thoughts about her actions and motivations. How could she justify her affair, especially on our wedding day, and continue it for who knows how long? I started to reassess our marriage. It was never perfect, but I believed in our exclusive love. Now, I realized it was a mistake from the very beginning. In the initial years following the wedding, things weren't smooth sailing. Naturally, we didn't anticipate a baby right away. Our original plan was to wait 3 to 4 years before starting a family. We had agreed on having 3 children before tying the knot. However, Carrie's arrival disrupted these plans. Learning that my best friend was the cause of this disruption made all the struggles seem futile. 14 years of effort seemed wasted, despite the good times we'd had being overshadowed by this revelation. If Jenna hadn't been involved with George, perhaps she would have conceived with me. Maybe her pregnancy wouldn't have been as difficult, and we wouldn't have had such a challenging child, leading her to not desire more children. George shattered my life when he seduced my future wife on our wedding day. Now he entertains her at least twice a month, all the while likely mocking me, the oblivious Pole. He must face consequences, I thought, as I lay down, attempting to calm myself and drift off to sleep. Anger simmered within me once more. I needed to regain composure or risk a sleepless night. I turned on the TV to watch a mindless comedy show. Laughter helped soothe my nerves, and I was ready to doze off, looking ahead to a busy day. The auction went smoothly. I snagged some excellent cars at favorable prices and networked with dealers in the Albuquerque area. Spotting no Miatas at the auction, I inquired with other dealers. 2 of them had one each, one red and the other black. I negotiated potential deals pending confirmation of my client's preferred color. Naturally, both dealers agreed, assuring me they'd handle the transaction. Once I provided details of the cars on my lot, I should have frequented this auction more often. Interacting with fellow businessmen in the same industry inspired me to expand my operations and provided a welcome distraction from my personal troubles. Later in the afternoon, during my meeting with the lawyer, the news wasn't encouraging. I faced losing half of my assets, along with alimony and child support payments for a child who wasn't even mine. In that moment, I decided against pursuing a divorce. Instead, I resolved to leave her with George's child, paying off the mortgage on the house. She could remain there, but with only my name on the mortgage, she wouldn't be able to sell it. By continuing to cover taxes and utilities while living elsewhere, she wouldn't have the option to resign and claim the house. However, I needed to make a decision regarding my business. Although it was registered as a corporation, I had a gut feeling that without proper protection, I could risk losing it. Consulting my business lawyer became a priority. Arriving home utterly exhausted from a demanding day, I informed Jenna of my fatigue. "I'm beat, planning to shower and hit the sack," I muttered, making my way to the bedroom. "Want dinner?" she inquired. "No, had a late lunch," I replied. At least she cared enough to ask. The shower was blissful, almost like my troubles were washing away. While problems persisted, I found solace in devising solutions. Minutes after my head hit the pillow, sleep enveloped me. The past week had been stressful, but with a plan in motion, I finally found mental reprieve. Rising early, feeling rejuvenated, I headed to the office before Jenna and Carrie stirred. There, amid spreadsheets and financial reports, I orchestrated my next moves. I briefed Paul on the 23 car purchases and instructed Anna to cease assigning work to George, emphasizing the need for secrecy. She eyed me quizzically. "You're the boss," she remarked. "Thank you, Anna. You're invaluable." At 9 sharp, I phoned my business lawyer seeking advice. "Your business is registered, but she might still force a sale to claim half its value. Consider selling preemptively," he suggested. "I can't. It's my life," I retorted. "Let me mull it over and get back to you by week's end." This news hit hard. I'd poured sweat and tears into building my business, akin to raising a child. Unlike Carrie, I thought bitterly, rage threatened to consume me again, but as a seasoned businessman, I knew to compartmentalize. I refocused on my business agenda. First up, contacting Doug, who confirmed George's claims. "Doug, Kurt Kaminsky here. I've got intel on 2 Miatas you might fancy, red and black. Still interested?" "If the price is right," he replied. Which color do you prefer? Let me show you both. We'll crunch numbers afterward. Even if we can't agree, I can sell it easily, I assured. And your pick? He pressed. Red makes a bold statement but fades faster. Black's elegant but heats up quickly here. Planning to garage it? Yes, he affirmed. Red it is then. When can we meet? Monday or Tuesday. Perfect. Call upon arrival. Deal. After hanging up, I dialed the dealer with the red Miata to negotiate a swap. He showed interest in the BMW sitting on my lot for 3 months, recognizing its better prospects in a larger city. Meanwhile, George showed up with several cars still awaiting repairs. As an independent contractor, his flexible schedule suited my needs, despite my simmering anger toward him. Overhearing salesmen discussing the impending arrival of 23 cars, George inquired about the schedule. Hey Kurt, when are these cars from the auction coming in? I want to plan my repairs, he queried. The auction house will handle the delivery, likely late next week or early the following, I informed him tersely, struggling to keep calm in the presence of this betrayer. I managed to chuckle as he departed. That weekend, I distanced myself from Jenna, occupying myself with yard work and errands. Checking her phone tracker no longer concerned me. I harbored only contempt for her. Raising another man's child felt unforgivable. Monday found me back at the car show. I arranged to trade the BMW for the Miata, setting off to Albuquerque to finalize the deal. We'll grab lunch upon your arrival, the dealer suggested. Informing Anna of my day-long absence, I instructed her to hold the fort. Got it, boss, she affirmed, her reliability shining through. A raise was in order. The journey and lunch were pleasant, forging a new camaraderie with the dealer. Driving back in the Miata, wind tousling my hair, I relished the freedom. Deciding to splurge further, I resolved to procure a black car, realizing I didn't need more than a 2-seater. Soon, I pulled into our driveway in a fiery red sports car. Jenna glanced out the window and exchanged words with Carrie, prompting them both to step outside to observe. Why do you need this car, honey? We need something with a back seat for Carrie, she remarked patronizingly. Just picked it up from Albuquerque for a client. Thought you might want to take a ride, I responded. No, honey, I'm not a fan of small cars, Jenna retorted with a hint of disdain. Carrie, I called, motioning for my daughter to join us. No, Dad, I'm already teased enough because of my last name. I don't want to be seen with a Polish used car salesman. Her words stung, typical of a teenager's bluntness. I was taken aback. Where did this disrespect come from? Glancing at Jenna, I realized she was treating Carrie's remark as inconsequential. Now both the women in my house were showing disrespect. Teenagers might not always be close with their parents, but the hurtful manner in which she spoke made me question the authenticity of my family life. I'm going for another drive. I'll be back soon, I announced, shifting the car into reverse and driving off. Fueled by frustration, I navigated the roads of Silver City until I returned home around 9:30, heading straight upstairs. I took a quick shower and crawled into bed. When I didn't emerge from the shower, Jenna entered the room, casting a bright light into my eyes. Squinting, I closed my eyes. Are you sulking because we didn't choose a sports car? Aren't you going to spend time with your family? You're not just Polish, you're childish, she chided. Her sudden attitude shift puzzled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it stemmed from George. Spending time with him had seemingly influenced her disregard for my heritage, now passed on to our daughter. Yet she wasn't even my daughter. Despite supporting her, I needed to accept that fact. Looks like you and your daughter would rather do without a pole around, so you might as well just leave, I retorted heatedly. Her demeanor only fueled my anger. She would regret treating me this way. From then on, the atmosphere in the Kaminsky household grew cold and silent. The following day, I contacted Doug, who came over to inspect the Miata. He was thrilled with it. After discussing the numbers, he was pleasantly surprised by the great deal he received, less than Kelly Blue Book. As he was finishing up the paperwork, he mentioned, "My best friend handles purchasing for the university, and we rotate about cars every 2 years. It might not be much, but could you speak with him? Always happy to do business, and I'll ensure he gets a good deal," I replied. "I'll have Jim reach out to you by the end of the week." "Thank you," I said. That's how I expanded my business, by treating people well and showing appreciation for their referrals. On Wednesday, my lawyer called. "Hey Kurt, I think I have a solution to your potential issue. Can you swing by this afternoon to discuss it?" "Absolutely. I'm eager to get started." The tension at home had become unbearable. At the meeting later that day, I heard the plan and was pleased with it. It would take about 2 weeks to execute, but if successful, it would be worth it. Over those 2 weeks, I gradually moved personal items and tools from my house to an apartment nearby. Meanwhile, George awaited the arrival of the 24 cars to do some work, but I kept delaying him. During the past weekend, I did some yard work and cleared out my closet and drawers when Jenna and Carrie weren't around. Jenna did laundry during the week, so she didn't notice the emptiness of my closet. This brings me back to that Monday night when I told Jenna, I'm leaving. She once again began to show rudeness and disrespect, targeting me for being Polish and a used car salesman. In the past, I would go to a motel for a night or two, depending on my level of anger. The following Tuesday morning, I arrived at the parking lot early and gathered my employees in the conference room. It was a regular weekly meeting, so nothing seemed unusual. I began, Good morning. As you all know, the cars I purchased a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday afternoon. They've all been inspected and prepped, ready for sale. We won't be using George for any more work here. If he asks, just say we're going in a different direction. You've all been fantastic. You're like family to me, so it's tough to discuss what's next. Pausing to wipe a tear, I continued, I've sold the business. Surprised, they looked at me, but nothing changes regarding your roles except Anna, who will take on some of my duties and receive a corresponding raise. Despite their astonishment, they began congratulating Anna, recognizing her hard work and worthiness. Anna, please come talk to me after the meeting. There are some things we need to discuss, I said. I'll still be involved in the company, but only in an advisory capacity and may occasionally sell. I don't want to interfere with your sales, I assured her. They were all relieved that I'd still be around, even if only occasionally. After the meeting, as we exited, George stood there. Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting? He asked, surprised. Because it was for staff only and you're not an employee, I explained. He seemed taken aback. I see the cars have arrived. I'll get to work on them, he said. No need. They've already been prepared for sale, I replied firmly, leaving him stunned. But I always check the cars, he protested. George, I've sold the business and the new owner wants to go in a different direction, I informed him, holding back my anger. I'll save that for another day. I kept it brief, realizing sometimes less is more. I can't believe you sold the business, he exclaimed, making it about himself. Or what now? You can pick up your check for the past 2 weeks' work. It wasn't much. Anna rarely utilized your services, I stated bluntly. He'd been expecting to work on the cars, but he was out of luck. I felt no sympathy. I just wished I could tell him what I really thought of him. When I spoke with Anna, I asked her to keep our conversation confidential. Of course, Kurt, I'll never divulge anything you don't want, she assured me. Here's the plan. I've set up companies registered in Nevada. One buys the parking lot, the other buys the company. I own all the shares in both. Eventually, I'll divorce Jenna and ensure she doesn't get the business. Why? She asked. I've moved out. Jenna doesn't know yet, but I'm not going back. She had an affair with George. In fact, Carrie isn't my daughter. I suspect she's George's. I'm not sure if Jenna knows, let alone George. They'll find out soon. I won't divorce, but I'll keep paying utilities and taxes for our house, so she can't claim abandonment and take everything. If she files for divorce, I don't want her to take over the business. That's why I agreed to the company being bought twice. Let them figure it out. The proceeds will be spent by the time she gets the divorce done. Plus, I barely make anything from consulting and a few commissions. Anna, you can handle daily operations. I'll be available for questions, but I trust you and your judgment, I explained. Anna smiled at the news of the new owner, but when she heard about Jenna and George, her expression turned deadly serious. This woman was someone I deeply admired and respected. I have one more task for you before I go. I need you to order a new sign and letterhead. We're changing the business name to Helpless Car. This will reinforce the idea to George and Jenna that the business is under new ownership, I explained. I spelled out the name to ensure she got it right. She looked puzzled. I'll explain the name choice someday. For now, just know it tells the whole story, I told her. Though she seemed puzzled, she trusted me enough to follow through with that. I bid farewell to everyone and headed out. I got into my Audi and drove towards Albuquerque. About 2 hours later, I received a call from Jenna. I hadn't expected her to call so soon. This was a familiar pattern. I'd leave for a day or two, she'd call, we'd talk, and I'd return. Things would change briefly, then revert to how they were before. We'd have another argument, and the cycle would repeat. I decided to answer the call, curious to hear what she would say this time. Hello, I spoke through the car's speakerphone. Kurt, what's going on? She asked, sounding hesitant. Nothing much, just heading to Albuquerque, I replied flatly. Why are you going there? She inquired. To pick up the car, I stated without emotion. So what I heard must not be true. George must have called you, figuratively speaking. Perhaps he asked your mistress what's going on with her husband, she speculated. I don't know, I responded. What did you hear? She pressed. George called and said you sold the business, she revealed. Why would he call you? I questioned, perplexing her. She corrected herself. Heck, your best friend. He was curious if I knew. Best friend, what a joke. I was a joke to him. The silly Pole, clueless about what's happening with his own wife behind his back. Apparently, my family felt embarrassed that I was a used car salesman. So yes, I sold the business. Now you won't have to bear that stigma anymore. Shouldn't we have discussed this first? She worried, likely concerned about our livelihood. This is my company. I owned it before we got married, and I can sell it whenever I want. I just hope the new owner treats my former employees well. Did you get a good price for it? She fretted about her standard of living. I didn't care. I just knew I needed a change. I'll start job hunting after I take some time off to relax. What about the mortgage? She panicked. I used the money to pay off the house. You only need to worry about utilities and taxes now. What about food, gas, insurance? She almost hysterically asked. Guess I overlooked those. Do you think you could work more hours? I suggested. When are you coming home? This was the moment of truth. She pressed. I won't return, I said casually. Remember what you said when I left that evening? Don't worry, I'll figure out how to cover the bills so the power won't be shut off. You can't do this, Kurt. You need to come back, she pleaded, desperation evident in her voice. No, I really don't want to, I responded impassively. Kurt, please don't do this, she cried. I've already made my decision. What about your daughter? She tried to appeal to my emotions. You mean Carrie? The girl who's ashamed of her last name and the fact that her old man is or was a used car salesman? Kurt, she's just a year-old girl. You can't take this to heart, I retorted. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. I won't be back. Again, so none of you will be embarrassed by me. With those words, I hung up and powered off the phone, letting her contemplate. I knew she'd try calling me back and grow frustrated when I didn't answer. After calming down from the call, I tried to enjoy the leisurely drive to Albuquerque. I assumed her next move would be to contact her lover for more information and to relay what I'd said. Upon reaching my destination, I switched my phone back on and noticed 5 missed messages. I listened to them, 3 from Jenna, 1 from George, and 1 from Anna. I immediately dialed Anna. Hi, Anna. Sorry my phone was off. I've been getting unwanted calls, I explained. Yes, I know. Your wife and George called me to find out where you were. I told them you don't own this place anymore, so you won't be coming back. Hope everything is okay, Anna informed me. Great, I replied. If they hassle you too much, tell them you'll call the police for phone harassment. I like that, she said. Kurt, you might feel like you don't have family or friends anymore, but trust me, you do. We're your family and always will be. Thank you, Anna. You know just what to say. I hope your husband realizes how lucky he is, I remarked. Trust me, he does. He tells me all the time. Never take that for granted, she assured me. I won't, I promised. After ending the call, I debated whether to call my unfaithful wife or that idiot. Nah, let them stew. Exiting the Audi, I entered the parking lot office where the owner awaited. I have that Audi I mentioned. Interested in discussing a swap, he proposed. Let's see. He admired the car's condition, inside, out, and under the hood. I could sell it in a week. Are you sure about the exchange? Feels like I'm getting the better end. You can return the favor sometime, he suggested. I'm not here to profit, just want a sports car, I replied. 30 minutes later, back on the road, top down, relishing the ride. Now, where to? North sounded good, so off to Santa Fe. Over the next 2 weeks, I journeyed through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and Colorado. I stayed close in case Anna needed me. I checked in with her a few times, and once things seemed settled, I headed west. Of course, they kept calling at first annoyance, then apologies, finally hints of resentment. I listened but shrugged it off. When they reported my canceled credit card, I chuckled. George even called, branding me a villain for leaving Jenna and Carrie. I chuckled some more. My lawyer texted me. Jenna threatened legal action if I didn't return. I returned his call. Hello, Kurt speaking. So, my wife made threats to you? Yes, but if you're still paying on the house, don't worry. She'll struggle to prove it. I assured him, I can offer something better. I have a recording where I declare my departure, and she insists I don't come back. It's gold. Send it my way, he requested. If she causes any trouble, I'll take it to her lawyer. Let them sort it out. Thanks. I'll check in next week to see how it's going. I roamed the Southwest. The Miata wasn't the coziest, but it was a blast. Caught glances, even a few flashes from bored middle-aged women, but I wasn't seeking that. After all, I was still hitched, no matter what. Drove to Reno, then Lake Tahoe, the coast, Napa Valley, and zigzagged along Highway 1, Yosemite, San Diego, Death Valley, to Vegas, then Phoenix. No rush. Chatted with folks in parking lots. Some envied a guy in his 30 seconds who could just hit the road. After approximately 3 months and covering 8,000 miles, I opted to head back to Silver City. Upon arrival at Helpless Auto, I was warmly welcomed by my entire team, including a few new faces. They all expressed joy at my return. Stepping into Anna's office, formerly mine, she looked up, spotting me. Her smile widened even more. Rising from her chair, she walked around her desk and gave me a tight hug. After chatting for a bit, I inquired, "Do you think I can treat everyone to food and drinks at Wrangler's? Can you close the store by 5? It was already 3. Absolutely, I'll make sure of it. The whole team will be there." After bidding them farewell and announcing our meeting in 2 hours, I left them in high spirits. Next, I paid a visit to my lawyer. During my travels, he informed me that Jenna had attempted to claim abandonment to seize my assets, but he managed to thwart her efforts. We discussed our next steps. At 5, I joined the team at Wrangler Restaurant. We enjoyed a fantastic dinner, and it was delightful catching up with everyone. As the evening wound down, they began to depart, leaving only Anna and me. She gazed at me and said, "You know, Kurt, you might feel powerless and lost, but you're mistaken. You simply placed trust in those you loved." I met her gaze. "So you figured it out?" "Yes, it took some time, but your mention of the new name telling the whole story lingered in my mind until I grasped it. You may be Polish, but those jokes never truly define you. They insult your heritage and who you are." "Thank you, Anna. You're the primary reason I returned. I had to witness how you handled my responsibilities. I'm pleased to say you haven't filled my shoes, you forged your own path." "I had an exceptional mentor," she expressed gratitude. We embraced, and then she departed to her husband, who appeared genuinely content. I headed back to the apartment I hadn't visited in 3 months. The air was stale, necessitating some ventilation. Opening the windows, I allowed the refreshing evening breeze to permeate the rooms. I grabbed a beer and settled on the terrace overlooking the pool. Several people were swimming, and a family was enjoying themselves nearby. My mind drifted to Jenna and me. We once harbored lofty aspirations and dreams when we tied the knot. Now they seemed to have vanished. Glancing at the wall clock, I noted it was around 8:30. A realization struck me. It was time for a confrontation. I rose, hopped into my Miata, and drove to my house, technically still mine since I purchased it before marrying Jenna, and my name was the only one on the deed. Disappointment washed over me as I pulled into the driveway. The yard was unkempt. It appeared the landscaping had been neglected. The porch light was on, indicating Jenna was likely home. I approached the door and knocked. After a moment, Carrie answered. Her eyes widened as she greeted me. "Dad? Hi, Carrie. Is your mom home?" She stuttered before yelling, "Mother." From the kitchen, I heard Jenna's tense, high-pitched voice. "What's the matter?" Carrie continued to stare at me and loudly exclaimed, "Dad!" Jenna appeared from around the corner, spotting me, and shrieked, "Where are you going?" I opted to respond calmly to her outcry. "Traveling," I stated evenly. Just then, George emerged from the bedroom in his underwear. "Oh," I remarked, "the whole family is here, Mom, Dad, and child." "What the hell are you talking about?" Jenna retorted sharply. "I guess George has stepped in to fill my role." "After all, it's rightfully his," I remarked. Jenna appeared puzzled, while Carrie's tone turned visibly enraged. "Actually, young lady, you seem to be misinformed," I interjected, knowing she disliked being corrected. "George never worked for me by his own choice, so I couldn't have fired him. Regarding bills, all utilities and car insurance are covered." Jenna interrupted. "What about groceries and gas for the car? You had a job, did you lose it? It used to cover expenses while I was away. Do you think you can just waltz back in and take over?" Jenna challenged. "No, I'll wait until you and your partner find somewhere else to live." It was clear they were staying together in my house, and Carrie seemed fine with it. Jenna retorted, "I'm not leaving my home." "Correction, this is my home. It was mine before we married, and only my name is on the deed," I asserted. "You left, so now it's mine," Jenna insisted. "That's not how the law works. Since I cover the utilities and taxes, I remain the legal owner. Even though I've been away briefly, it's still mine." "Don't worry, I'll give you until the end of next month to find a new place. Just make sure you take your daughter with you." "What do you mean, your daughter? She's our daughter," Jenna protested. "You couldn't have said it more accurately," I chuckled. Jenna looked confused. Turning to Carrie, I disclosed, "Carrie, I know you dislike being called Polish, so here's some news. Your real father isn't me. It's George." Silence enveloped the room. After a moment, Jenna whispered, "What?" "Yes, Jenna. It seems your carelessness on our wedding day resulted in a child, but not mine. However, it's good news for you, Carrie. You can now take your real father's last name and become Carrie George's daughter." I wonder if perhaps Mom chose the name Carrie out of respect for her lover, I pondered aloud. Jenna and George exchanged looks, the color draining from his face. What about you, George? Don't you want to step up as a father? Well, that's unfortunate. It's time to take responsibility. But look at the bright side, it's just 4 more years until college, I remarked. Jenna and George nearly echoed each other. I don't believe this. With a swift motion, I handed them the DNA report. See for yourselves. They snatched it, glanced at it, and then both collapsed. Carrie, inform the Lovebirds that your mom will be served with divorce papers next week, along with an eviction notice, I instructed. Before walking away. Throughout my absence, I couldn't shake the thought of whether this affair had been ongoing during our marriage. Did she choose me, or was I just a pawn? I felt utterly helpless, ignorant, and vulnerable. George had mocked me behind my back and even cracked polished jokes to my face. Back at the apartment, I drowned my thoughts in beer. The next morning, I visited the lawyer to initiate the paperwork. Despite knowing I'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, being a barely working person meant I wouldn't owe alimony or child support, especially with another man in my place. Or at least, that's what I hoped for. The betrayal by Jenna and George was devastating. Rebuilding trust, whether with a man or woman, would be a daunting task. Perhaps I should consider therapy. As the divorce proceedings commenced, I returned to work at the dealership, emphasizing to my colleagues that I was no longer the boss and only needed 1 sale per week to cover my expenses. I even insisted on just 1. When faced with court-ordered child support, I ensured that my bank accounts were emptied, leaving only enough for my basic needs. At month's end, Jenna hired a lawyer, though I questioned how she could afford one. Perhaps he worked pro bono. Regardless, they'd be in for a surprise. Despite scrutinizing my accounts and the sale itself, they failed to uncover anything substantial. I learned from my colleagues that during my absence, George visited the dealership almost daily for the first 2 weeks, trying to secure work from Anna. However, she consistently turned him down. Eventually, he gave up. Now he regretted not obtaining his ASC certification, as his only job prospect was at Valine doing quick oil changes for $13 an hour. I hoped Jenna would work full-time, or they'd struggle financially. I contacted the realtor and notified Jenna that I was listing the house for sale, anticipating a 50-50th split of our assets. Since she had already received an eviction notice, she needed to vacate before the sale closed. One evening, Jenna knocked on my door and I reluctantly let her in. What do you want? Kurt, can we talk? She asked. I'm not sure it's a good idea. We're in a legal battle, I replied. Come on, Kurt, it's just us, no lawyers. Can we have a civil conversation? She pleaded. All right, but let's go to Denny's, I suggested. There'll be witnesses, I thought to myself. I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. At Denny's, after exchanging pleasantries, I asked, why, Jenna? She hesitated before answering. I guess the simple answer is that I liked both of you and couldn't choose. So you were seeing both of us at the same time? I questioned. Jenna looked down and admitted yes, but George warned me not to tell you because he knew it would ruin your relationship with him. Then why did you say yes when I proposed? I inquired. Because I loved you and George, she replied. I loved him too, but I knew he wouldn't make a good husband, so we ended things when you proposed, and I focused on us and our wedding plans. So, on our wedding day, you were with him? I probed. Jenna started crying and confessed, yes, everything was a mess then. What was it? I pressed further. I didn't want to lose him, and he didn't want to lose me, she admitted. Well, now you have each other and your child. By the way, you did a great job with the name. I didn't even realize until later during my travels that Carrie wasn't yours, I revealed. Jenna looked at me and said, Kurt, I still love you. It's nice to hear, Jenna, but I'm not sure you understand what love truly means, I replied. I loved you more than anything, and clearly you can't say the same. I loved you, she retorted, but now I feel nothing but contempt, I stated firmly. Jenna realized our relationship was over. There would never be an us again. Before she left, I had to ask one final question. Have you ever stopped? After hesitating, she decided to tell the truth. We never ceased. We had our quiet times, but we typically met twice a month, she admitted. I was hoping for a different response, but I appreciated her honesty. One more thing, about a year ago, your behavior towards me changed. What triggered it? I inquired. Her face flushed red, then she grew slightly angry. George started pushing for a bacchanalia, not involving you. I might have considered it if you were involved, but we couldn't navigate it. His persistence made me resent you for something I knew you wouldn't agree to. It's odd, but I thought I could have both of my men together and resented you for not being open to it, she confessed. Did you go through with it? I asked. No, I contemplated it, but then you left and everything fell apart, she admitted. Well, now you're free to pursue it. Your choices don't affect me anymore, I remarked. Sensing our conversation was concluding, I settled the bill and we headed to our cars. 4 months later, we stood before a judge and finalized our divorce. George was present too. Exiting the courthouse, Jenna suggested, maybe we can grab a drink, the traditional way. Certainly, I agreed. Despite the previous animosity, it had dissipated. Then I thought, this marks the end of my association with them. They can now be together. Let them wallow in their own mess, they deserve each other. Ha! Jenna will have to adjust to a lower standard of living. All right, maybe the resentment hasn't completely faded, despite being Polishi demand respect.